Zeke Draker was born into the prestigious Draker family, a lineage of legendary dragon slayers. However, his status within the family was short-lived. Deemed unworthy due to his inability to wield a sword, he was abandoned. Unlike his ancestors, who excelled as knights, Zeke was born with a different power, a cursed healing ability that no one valued. Determined to grow stronger, Zeke wandered across continents in search of power. His journey eventually led him to an ancient relic, an artifact so valuable that even the Emperor coveted it. But before he could fully grasp its potential, Imperial soldiers ambushed him. His injuries were so severe that even his healing magic failed him. Just when it seemed like the end, the relic activated, triggering an upgrade system that rewound his body to a younger age. Along with this regression, ancient powers awakened within him. From this moment, his true story began, right where it all started at the Draker household's training institution, the Cradle. To understand Zeke's struggle, it's essential to grasp the power of his lineage. The Draker family is one of the three great transcendent households, their prestige tracing back to their ancestor, Tarakan Draker. 1,000 years ago, Tarakan became a hero after slaying the malevolent dragon, Bahamut, cementing his family's influence. Every Draker descendant since has inherited the blessing of Aura, allowing them to awaken formidable power and excel as warriors. Every descendant, except Zeke. He was born without Aura, a flaw that made him an outcast. Now, having regressed, Zeke lay on his bed, feeling unbothered, until a sudden system notification jolted him. Instinctively, he snapped to attention, scanning his surroundings for any intruders. But after a moment, he dismissed it as his imagination. However, more system windows appeared, and one, in particular, held shocking information. It announced that his soul had merged with the will of the Elder Dragon. With this, he was granted partial authority over the system. As the activation completed, his vision was bombarded with a flood of system windows. The first one displayed his stats, class, and a unique ability labeled Draconian Skill, a power that could only be unlocked once he accumulated 10 karma points. Unfortunately, at that moment, his karma points stood at 0. Curious, Zeke starts experimenting with the system, quickly figuring out how to navigate its features. Among all the details displayed in the administration status window, one thing catches his attention: his class skill. The reason? The term comes from the ancient Draconic language, a classification system long lost in this era. He remembers hearing about it from his master, who once explained that people in the ancient world categorize themselves by their strengths, each class mastering specialized techniques, known as skills. Since the system classifies him as a healer, his corresponding skill is, unsurprisingly, healing. The moment he sees this, memories of his harsh training come flooding back. His master, a woman who never went easy on him, pushed him to the brink of death countless times, forcing him to heal himself over and over. The pain she inflicted was unbearable, but it turned him into the powerful healer he became. To confirm the system's claim, Zeke decides to activate his ability. The result stuns him. His healing powers work instantly. This is strange because, in his past life, he only awakened as a healer in his 20s, after his Ether Hall was unlocked. That means in this life, his Ether Hall is already open. Not only has he returned to the past with all his memories intact, but his abilities have also carried over, giving him a huge advantage. Just as he's about to dive deeper into the system, a voice calls his name, followed by a knock on the door. Panicking, Zeke scrambles to dismiss the system windows before anyone notices. However, the visitor doesn't bother waiting and barges in without permission. The man standing before him is Decker, Zeke's exclusive servant. He's here to check if his young master is ready for an important event. The problem? Zeke has no idea what event he's talking about. His cluelessness visibly irritates Decker, whose piercing gaze could make anyone shrink in fear. To think that his young master actually forgot such an important day, it's enough to make Decker lose his patience. Meanwhile, Zeke instinctively starts trembling. Even though his mind belongs to a 32-year-old man, his body reacts out of habit. In his past life, he was always terrified of Decker, and clearly, that fear still lingers. At that moment, one of Zeke's class skills activates, Composed Mind. Almost instantly, his trembling stops, and any trace of fear disappears from his face. This skill ensures that no matter the situation, the user remains mentally unaffected, allowing them to stay completely calm and collected. Zeke finds it rather convenient that it triggers on its own. Meanwhile, Decker continues his relentless reminders about the significance of the event ahead. Zeke, however, remains silent, seemingly unbothered. It's only after repeated insistence that he finally acknowledges Decker's words, admitting that he does remember. In fact, he recalls it all too well, the evaluation test known as Pancration. To understand the gravity of this event, it's important to know how the Draker's training system, the Cradle, operates. Starting at the age of 7, all Draker children undergo rigorous training for 5 years, mastering the basics of combat. Every year, students are evaluated through fierce competitions in swordsmanship and hand-to-hand combat. The highlight of these evaluations is Pancration, a brutal, no-rules battle where anything goes. Typically, instructors decide the matchups, though students may challenge each other if both sides agree. With no restrictions, injuries are inevitable, and on rare occasions, students don't make it out alive. Despite the risks, every student is forced to fight, as the results determine their class placement within the academy. Finally, the day of Pancration arrives. Students gather in a massive amphitheater, buzzing with nervous excitement. At the center stands Instructor Panmark, the head instructor. His sharp gaze sweeps across the crowd before he reminds them that today is the final stage of their evaluation. The students shout in unison, their enthusiasm catching even the instructor's attention. Among the crowd, a few students spot Zeke and immediately begin whispering. Some mock him, laughing at the fact that he even showed up after the humiliation he suffered last year. Soon, the duels begin. The first match is over in a flash. One student, Aaron, knocks his opponent out cold with a single uppercut, ending the fight before it even starts. While the other students watch in awe, Zeke remains unimpressed. To him, this is nothing special. Zeke recalls the days when he, too, was terrified of these fights. But after everything he endured in his past life, this kind of battle feels like child's play. As he yawns repeatedly, waiting for his turn, one particular student, Leon Conrad, eagerly anticipates their match. Eventually, Zeke's name is called, and sure enough, his opponent is Leon. While Zeke lazily rubs his tired eyes, Leon wastes no time, immediately throwing a jab, both verbal and physical, mocking the humiliation Zeke suffered last year. Of course, Zeke hasn't forgotten. The memory is painfully clear. How he once begged Leon for mercy. But that was the old Zeke. Those days are long gone. Leon has been his opponent every single year, and Zeke knows him all too well. His dirty tricks, his arrogance, and the trash family he comes from. There's no doubt in Zeke's mind that Leon manipulated things behind the scenes to make sure they were matched up again. To Zeke, a loyal dog that bites is better than having a cousin like him. In his past life, Zeke never got the chance to meet his 4 direct siblings, but he had plenty of cousins, most of whom took every opportunity to bully him. Leon calls out to him again, spewing more insults, taunting him about last year's humiliating defeat. He even questions whether that disgrace wasn't enough to keep Zeke from ever stepping into Pancration again. But while Leon keeps running his mouth, Zeke remains calm, all thanks to Composed Mind. That patience, however, has its limits. There's only so much disrespect Zeke is willing to tolerate. His cold response only fuels Leon's anger, pushing him to cross the line. Without warning, Leon grabs Zeke by the head, as if trying to physically assert his dominance. Bad move. Before he even realizes what's happening, Zeke's fist crashes into Leon's face, sending him flying backward. The entire amphitheater falls silent. This devastating punch wasn't just an ordinary hit. It was powered by Critical Strike, a skill that significantly boosts attack damage. However, the ability comes with a risk. If the attack fails, the opponent can counter. But Zeke's punch landed perfectly. No room for a counter. Leon, meanwhile, is writhing on the ground, clutching his face in agony. Zeke takes a moment to reflect. He only meant to knock Leon out, not to activate critical strike. But what's done is done. The instructor rushes over, tending to the injured brat while scolding Zeke for attacking before the match officially began. But Zeke, completely unfazed, casually responds, questioning why they even need permission to fight when they're already standing in the arena. After all, the one who strikes first has the advantage, so why waste the opportunity? As he says this, his menacing aura fills the air, and the sheer killer intent radiating from him makes the instructor visibly tremble. Meanwhile, Leon quickly reassures the instructor that everything is fair game. If he were to back down now, the humiliation would be unbearable. Determined to salvage his pride, he demands the fight officially begin. The moment the signal is given, Leon recklessly charges forward. Bad move. Again, Zeke meets him head-on with another punch straight to the face. However, this time, Leon doesn't feel any pain. At first, he was terrified of getting hit, remembering how devastating that first punch was. But realizing that this one didn't hurt at all, that only boosts his foolish confidence. So that first punch was just a fluke? Leon thinks. All he has to do, he believes, is keep his guard up, and Zeke won't be a threat at all. Leon quickly notices Zeke shifting his stance, preparing a counterattack with his left hand. Anticipating the move, Leon ducks at the perfect moment, dodging the attack and grabbing Zeke, attempting to slam him to the ground. But in an instant, Leon suddenly takes a hit so fast that even the spectators can't see what happened. His body trembles violently, completely shaken. Even the instructor, who was certain Leon had secured the advantage, stands there dumbfounded, unable to process what just happened. Zeke had struck Leon square in the chin, slipping out of his grasp with surgical precision. Leon made the mistake of letting his guard down, thinking he had Zeke right where he wanted him. But Zeke? He never lost focus for a second. The level of concentration and precision needed to pull off such a clean, devastating move is a feat in itself. The instructor is now questioning everything. Is this really the same Zeke Draker they all look down on? Leon, on the other hand, is a complete mess. His brain is scrambled from that brutal punch, his body unsteady. But before he can even process what's happening, another strike lands. The force sends him stumbling, but he grits his teeth, steadies himself, and throws a desperate punch in retaliation. At that critical moment, one of Zeke's class skills activates automatically. Heightened sense. This ability sharpens his perception, allowing him to see everything in extreme slow motion, 960 frames per second. With the punch now moving at a snail's pace, dodging it is effortless. As Leon's fist zips past him, Zeke grabs his extended arm and slams him into the ground. Hard. The impact is so devastating that the ground beneath him literally shatters. At the same time, another skill activates, Precise Stab, which helps Zeke target weak points for maximum damage. With Leon pinned, completely at his mercy, Zeke balls up his fist, preparing to obliterate his face. Leon panics, begging him to stop. But Zeke? He doesn't hesitate. A punch lands square on Leon's face, leaving him completely wrecked. The sheer brutality of the hit leaves the instructor drenched in sweat, and the spectators sit in stunned silence. For Zeke, this final blow feels immensely satisfying. After years of torment, after all the humiliation, he's finally turned the tables. More importantly, this little display of power will serve as a warning. His other cousins will think twice before messing with him again. Not that it really matters. If they dare cross him, he'll make sure they regret it for good. Yet, despite this brutal defeat, some fools still haven't learned their lesson. One particularly arrogant punk, Jaken Vardek, steps forward, challenging Zeke to a Pancration match. This cocky brat is itching to prove a point, hoping to make a statement through sheer force. Zeke, however, finds it amusing. In fact, he's almost bored at the thought of fighting Jaken alone. So, he raises the stakes. He offers Jaken the chance to bring reinforcements, to make things more entertaining. And without hesitation, Zeke calls out another student by name, Liam Stone. Liam is nothing more than Jaken's lackey, a yes man, always tailing behind him. This suggestion feels like a slap to Jaken's face, as if Zeke is saying he's so weak he'll need backup. The very idea of needing help to beat Zeke is a humiliation Jaken refuses to accept. But Zeke keeps pushing his buttons, fueling his rage even more. Now, Jaken is seething, more than ready to shut Zeke up. As both fighters step into the arena, the instructor glares at Zeke and explicitly warns him, "Don't move before the signal." Zeke smirks, because it turns out Jaken did bring his servant along after all. And that only makes things even more fun. Liam, in his past life, was a renowned warrior, even earning the title of Mercenary King. Back then, he served under Jaken and joined the cradle at the academy. However, as a distant relative, he was largely ignored in his education. Desperate to improve, he pleaded for a chance to study at Academy Bala, but ultimately ended up in the Knight Order of the small nation of Baranon. When Baranon fell, Liam became a mercenary, and in those turbulent times, strength naturally attracted followers. With years of battle experience, he rose to fame as a Red Knight and eventually founded the Stone Mercenaries. Uniting the three largest mercenary factions, he solidified his title as the Mercenary King. Later, when the Empire hired the Stone Mercenaries, Liam entered the Continental Wars, where he became a formidable enemy to Zeke and the Northerners. But this time, Zeke is determined to carve out a different path. As soon as the instructor signals the start, Jaken rushes forward with a powerful punch, the force of his strike strong enough to disturb the air. But Zeke doesn't even flinch. He effortlessly catches the blow, stopping it like it was nothing. Jaken quickly yanks his hand away and retaliates with a kick, but the attack backfires spectacularly. The moment his leg makes contact, searing pain shoots through him. He's hit Zeke's reinforced barrier around his elbow, dealing serious damage to himself instead. Staggering in shock, he barely has a second to react before Zeke charges in, his fist glowing with activated skill, ready to strike. Panicked, Jaken throws his arms over his face to block the incoming attack, but he's made a grave miscalculation. Zeke never intended to hit his face. Instead, he targets the already injured leg, delivering a ruthless blow. Jaken barely has time to process the pain before Zeke follows up with a crushing punch to the ribs, making him cough up blood. The once arrogant fighter is now sprawled on the ground, stripped of his pride. Furious and humiliated, he orders his sidekick to finish Zeke off immediately. Now it's Liam's turn. The man radiates an unmistakable killing intent as he steps forward. The worst part about facing him is his insane reach. If Zeke lets him strike first, the fight could turn south quickly. Knowing this, Zeke takes the initiative. He launches into a rapid assault, using a skill called Slash. Moving so fast that he appears as a blur, he unleashes a relentless storm of punches. The speed of his strikes completely disrupts Liam's vision, forcing him onto the defensive. The real battle is just beginning. The spectators watching from the sidelines are in utter disbelief. True despair washes over them as they witness just how much of an absolute powerhouse Zeke is. They're curious, confused even because none of them have ever seen anything like this before. In a world where swords reign supreme, a fighter who relies purely on their fists is practically unheard of. Zeke's technique is undeniably impressive, but it's also taking a serious toll on his body. And yet, that's not even the biggest problem. The real challenge here is Liam's monstrous physique. No counters, no dodging. Liam is just standing his ground, absorbing every hit with his guard up. If he was this resilient now, imagine how terrifying he must have been back when he ruled as the Mercenary King. Realizing that his attacks aren't making a dent, Zeke decides to go all in. He channels all his strength into one final, devastating strike. One that will break through Liam's defense no matter what. But just as he launches the attack, Liam dodges with infuriating ease. He doesn't flinch, doesn't turn his head. He simply redirects the strike as if it was nothing. The sheer arrogance of it pisses Zeke off. Before he can react, Liam seizes the opening and hoists him high into the air, preparing to slam him into the ground with brute force. Zeke, however, refuses to go down without a fight. Thinking fast, he delivers a sharp strike to Liam's head. His class skill, heightened sense, activates, allowing him to take full advantage of the moment. In an instant, he locks his legs around Liam's neck, cutting off his air supply. No matter how absurdly strong Liam is, even he can't fight if oxygen isn't reaching his brain. But Zeke underestimated his opponent. Liam retaliates viciously, delivering crushing blows one after another. The relentless barrage forces Zeke to cough up blood, his body screaming in pain. Even so, Liam's strength finally starts to fade. His movements grow sluggish, his body weakening with each second he struggles. Eventually, he collapses, unconscious from the lack of air. The spectators are left speechless, their breath caught in their throats. The sheer intensity of the fight leaves them in awe. But among them, one student stands out, not terrified, not shaken, but thrilled. Instead of fear, she feels exhilaration. She can't wait for the day she gets to fight Zeke herself. Later that evening, after the grueling day comes to an end, Zeke returns to his quarters. His servant, having heard about the brutal match, immediately asks about his condition. Rumors of his severe injuries have already spread. Zeke brushes it off, claiming he's fine, but the butler isn't convinced. Ignoring his protests, he insists on checking his pulse, determined to see for himself if Zeke is really telling the truth. Zeke can tell exactly what this old man is up to. He's not just checking for injuries. He wants to see if Zeke has awakened his aura yet. Eventually, Zeke extends his hand, and without hesitation, the servant channels a stream of blue energy into him. The sight of it makes Zeke pause. Is this guy a blue knight? Normally, when checking someone's awakening, people just examine the dantian. But this man is going the extra mile, using an unusually precise technique. Imbuing someone else with aura is already difficult, but controlling it with this much precision, that takes serious skill. If this old man really is a blue knight, it raises an even bigger question. What's someone of his caliber doing acting as his servant? Knights aren't all the same. They're ranked based on their martial prowess and aura manipulation skills. The lowest level is White Swordsman, which is where most children start before their blessing rite. After awakening their aura and opening their dantian, they become Yellow Swordsman, the level all cradle trainees reach after the ritual. Learning to fully control aura earns the title of knight, while those who can reinforce their sword with aura become Purple Knights. The Blue Knight level is reached when one can manifest an aura blade, a feat few ever achieve. Beyond that lies the realm of those who have truly transcended their limits. The Red Knights, the rank both Liam and Zeke had reached before his regression. And above even them, there exists an almost mythical level, the Black Knights, of whom only a handful exist across the entire continent. With all this in mind, Zeke can't help but wonder, why is someone as skilled as this servant, someone who could easily be leading troops, stuck playing the role of his babysitter? Still, no matter how skilled he is, there's no way he can detect Zeke's ether, a power that only 2 people in the world can use. Finally, the old man finishes his examination. His tone firm, he questions Zeke directly. Is there something you're hiding? Zeke remains unfazed. Keeping his cool, he feigns ignorance, flipping the question back on him. Do you know something that I don't? For a moment, silence fills the room. But before the tension lingers, Zeke casually brushes it off, claiming he was just joking. The butler hesitates, clearly unsettled, but he can't resist asking one more thing. Why have you changed so much? That question stops Zeke in his tracks. He turns to face the butler, eyes sharp. You're asking the wrong question, he says. Instead of asking why he's changed now, the real question should be, why did it take him so long to change in the first place? A heavy silence hangs between them. But before the butler can respond, Zeke breaks it himself. He informs him that this is just the beginning. There are plenty more surprises ahead. So instead of being shocked every time, all the butler needs to do is follow orders. The humble servant bows his head in acknowledgement, ready to follow his master's will without question. With that, he reports that the training room Zeke requested is already prepared and waiting. Satisfied, Zeke dismisses him, telling him to get some well-earned rest. As Zeke walks away alone, a lingering thought gnaws at him. His butler might have been ordered to keep an eye on him. If that's the case, it's better to keep him close. That way, Zeke can manipulate him and extract whatever information he needs. He still has to figure out who gave the order. It's unlikely that anyone from his mother's side would dare, which means it has to be one of his siblings. Upon entering the personal training room, Zeke is momentarily taken aback by its sheer extravagance. It only reinforces the fact that this household truly lives up to its name. Before beginning his training, he decides to check the system. With a single command, the system panel materializes before him. Right away, he notices that his slash skill has reached proficiency. He has no idea how it happened, but a guess quickly forms. It must have leveled up from repeated use. Unlike other abilities, slash activates naturally through his movements, requiring no conscious effort. If this pattern holds, then any new techniques he learns will likely be registered as skills as well. One thing still puzzles him: the difference between a skill and a class skill. They seem to function similarly, both activating instinctively, yet he knows there must be a distinction. His eyes then land on another entry, the Draconian skill. However, he can't access it yet. Unlocking it requires 10 points, and right now his karma points are sitting at 0. Clicking on the option, a system message appears, informing him that he can earn karma points by killing monsters. This sparks another thought. Monsters are abundant in the dungeons. However, access is restricted to those at least at the Purple Knight level. He's not there yet. For now, his biggest questions remain unanswered. Why did he regress to the past? And what exactly is this system? The existence of skills, class skills, and the system itself all seem connected to that ancient relic. But without more information, it's impossible to draw conclusions. Whatever the case, he won't waste time speculating. He grips his sword tightly. Whether it's through this system or the power of his Draker lineage, he will use everything at his disposal to grow stronger. In this world, there are two dominant forces: aura, wielded by knights, and mana, harnessed by mages. Knights refine their aura in the dungeons, while mages cultivate their mana through circles. The two powers exist at opposite ends of the spectrum. If one awakens one path, they forever lose the ability to walk the other. Unlike others in his household, Zeke was unfortunate enough to awaken neither a Danteon nor a circle. This inability marked him as a failure, leading to his abandonment by the Draker family. Cast aside, he wandered aimlessly until he met his master. During his vagabond days, his master taught him many things, but two lessons stood above the rest: the art of healing and the ether hall, a unique technique his master had developed. Through it, Zeke learned to harness the energy of nature, known as ether. To this day, he and his master remain the only ether users in existence. After just 2 hours of training, Zeke feels like he's about to collapse. But then his class skill, healing, activates alongside another, vigor recovery. Healing is an exceptionally rare skill, one Zeke never even knew existed until he met his master. If others ever saw him use it, they'd label him an irregular. That's exactly why he avoided using it during his fight against Liam, only healing himself once he was safely back in his room. With his body fully restored, he pushes forward. He can't afford to waste a single moment. By dawn, exhaustion weighs on him like a lead weight. The entire training hall bears the evidence of his relentless efforts, deep gashes scarring the floor, trails marking where his sword carved through the air. Still, this is only the beginning. A week passes. Inside the Cradle cafeteria, students whispering about Zeke. They say he's like a completely different person. But since he was born a loser, their only explanation is that he must have dabbled in black magic. Meanwhile, in a private lounge, the so-called big shots of the academy are gathered for dinner. The first is Raina Turin, eating her steak in silence. Next to her sits Owen Zimmons, calm and composed, and across from him, Leon, battered but still as rowdy and impatient as ever. Owen advises Jakin to eat properly. He'll need the energy for his upcoming swordsmanship duel. But Jakin, irritated for no apparent reason, slams his fist against the table with such force that his steak falls to the ground. The impact even causes Reina's steak to jump off her plate, which instantly enrages her. Her glare alone is enough to make Jakin hesitate, if only for a moment. All four of these students have one thing in common. They hate Zeke. It's no surprise they're together. But despite their shared resentment, it's clear they don't actually get along. The only thing holding their fragile alliance together is their mutual grudge against him. Owen acknowledges that Zeke was both brave and impressive during Pancration, but he remains convinced that when it comes to swordsmanship, Zeke will be nothing short of pathetic. As far as he knows, Zeke doesn't even know how to hold a sword properly, so there's no way he could ever be a threat. One of the others chimes in, pointing out how weak Zeke must be. After all, he had to get a customized sword because the standard ones were too heavy for him. Even with that, Jakin still can't wrap his head around the fact that he lost to that inferior piece of trash. He refuses to believe that Zeke won against him through sheer skill. He's convinced it was nothing but dumb luck. Reina, however, doesn't share their delusions. If you actually believe that nonsense, she says coldly, then none of you deserve to be knights of the Draker household. Before we jump into the duel itself, here's some context. Unlike Pancration, which involves controlled combat, sword duels are fought with real weapons. As a result, they're the primary cause of injuries in the academy. This is also where the true difference in a cadet's skills becomes glaringly obvious. A month after the current final exams, the blessing rite will take place, the moment when the Drakers awaken their aura. Until then, the duels serve as a proving ground. And now, the day of the duel has finally arrived. The instructor calls Zeke forward. Without a shred of hesitation, he steps onto the battlefield, casually resting a massive sword over his shoulder. The blade is so absurdly big that it immediately draws laughter from the crowd. Is this guy serious? To them, it's obvious. Zeke must think that bigger is better, that the sheer size of his weapon will give him an advantage. From the other side, Reina steps up, fully fired up. With a dramatic motion, she throws down the gauntlet, officially challenging Zeke to the duel. Zeke doesn't hesitate. Without a second thought, he accepts, but something about him unsettles her. Watching him effortlessly lift that claymore, she realizes this isn't the same Zeke she once knew. The person she remembers struggled to even hold a sword properly. But the presence he exudes now, it's different. Striking. For the briefest moment, she feels something she never expected, intimidation. But she quickly shakes it off, disgusted at herself for even entertaining such a thought. She was the one who issued the challenge. Backing down isn't an option. At the same time, Zeke is also feeling the pressure. He knows his usual tricks won't be enough to secure victory, because this isn't just any duel. This is a fight against the Lightning Knight. And that's straight up nerve-wracking. In his past life, Reina Terran had carved her name into history during the Continental Wars, earning recognition as one of the strongest warriors of her generation. Unlike most, she had awakened her aura years before undergoing the blessing rite, a feat that placed her in a league of her own. However, despite possessing such a rare gift, she never used her aura inside Cradle. Instead, she dedicated herself to mastering the fundamentals. But that doesn't mean she's any less dangerous. As soon as the duel begins, the clash of steel echoes through the air. Their swords collide in a burst of sparks, neither side giving an inch. After the first impact, Reina swiftly steps back before charging again. With just one powerful strike, she forces Zeke to slide backward. That alone tells him everything he needs to know. She's even better than he expected. Without missing a beat, Reina lunges again, her blade moving at lightning speed. Each swing crackles through the air, lighting up the space between them with every strike. In the background, her so-called allies grow impatient. "Just finish him off already," one of them shouts. But one of the more level-headed observers shuts them down. "You idiots," they mutter. She's not playing around. He's the one pushing her back. From Reina's perspective, she can see the gaps in Zeke's defense, the vulnerabilities she should be able to exploit. Yet every time she moves to strike, her attack is blocked, as if he's encouraging her efforts. And that's what frustrates her the most. It's almost as if this isn't a duel for him. It's a lesson. Every time she lands a hit, he leaves another opening. inviting her to attack, challenging her to break past his defenses. After several exchanges, she finally steps back, her breath heavy from the relentless back and forth. But Zeke? He doesn't look even remotely tired. Not a single bead of sweat on his face. In fact, he looks bored. She's fighting honestly, holding back her aura in favor of pure skill. It's something he expected from someone obsessed with mastering the basics. But now that they're here, he decides to help her break out of her shell. Lowering his stance dramatically, he makes it look as if he's about to close the distance in one explosive move. Reina, confident in her speed, doesn't think much of Zeke's low stance. She's sure that as long as she maintains distance, she'll be able to react in time. But in the blink of an eye, Zeke closes the gap, and suddenly, he's right in her face. Before she can even process what's happening, he swings his massive sword with enough force to crack the ground. The sheer impact sends shockwaves through the arena. Still, Reina clings to her belief. As long as there's space between them, she can counter him. Then, Zeke swings his sword again, this time through empty air. At first, it seems like a complete miss, but it wasn't meant to hit her. The sheer force of his strike sends debris flying straight into her face, smacking her square in the nose, leaving it bruised and battered. The moment she flinches, Zeke charges in, his sword hurtling toward her. The gleaming blade stops just centimeters from her neck, and in that instant, she's certain this is it. She's done for. But then, something unexpected happens. Zeke's sword suddenly flies out of his hands, landing a few feet away. The crowd erupts, quickly declaring him the loser. Cheers break out for Reina, celebrating her victory, all without even using her aura. But one person isn't fooled. The instructor's face turns ghostly pale, his expression one of sheer horror, as if he just found out he has multiple fathers. What the cadets didn't notice is what really happened. As Zeke's blade closed in on Reina, she instinctively used a faint trace of aura, so subtle it was almost imperceptible. The significance of this? Reina swore she wouldn't use her aura until she officially entered the academy. Yet in this duel, Zeke forced her to break that promise. For a moment, she just stands there, doubt and regret flickering across her face. Then, without warning, Zeke rushes her again. Before she can react, bam, his fist slams into her throat. She chokes, her knees buckling as blood dribbles from her mouth. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Outrage erupts. This was a sword duel. That was a cheap shot. This is shameless. Everyone present turns against Zeke, pointing fingers, throwing insults. But he doesn't even acknowledge the noise. Completely unfazed, he calmly turns to Reina and asks, "Do you want to continue?" Reina, still struggling to stand, stubbornly insists she hasn't lost. To her, the only reason he landed the hit was because she let her guard down. But then a chilling realization hits her. If he had been holding a knife instead of throwing a punch, she'd already be 6 feet under. That thought alone seals her decision. With a sense of honor, she concedes defeat. The once rowdy crowd that had mocked Zeke just moments ago now stood frozen in stunned silence. Zeke Draker, the very man they had ridiculed as nothing more than human scum, had just secured an undeniable victory. And not against just anyone, but Reina Turin, the prodigious Lightning Knight. For most of the spectators, the idea of Reina losing was beyond belief. Meanwhile, at Abel's castle, the aftermath of a brutal battle left bodies scattered across the pit. William, witnessing the carnage, couldn't understand how Abel remained so calm, casually sipping tea as if nothing had happened. But Abel's mind was elsewhere, on a letter detailing Zeke Draker's victory over Reina. Setting his cup down, he inquired about the timing of the upcoming blessing rite. With the full moon still some time away, Abel decided it was the perfect opportunity to visit the Draker family. William was shocked. Abel intended to go alone. But to the renowned Swordmaster, this was more than just a visit. He was eager to see firsthand the awakening of the youngest Draker. While the rest of the cradle buzzed over his victory, Zeke remained unfazed. He simply returned to his training, uninterested in any celebration. Days turned to weeks, and soon a full month had passed. The day of the blessing rite had finally arrived. Yet, Zeke still couldn't grasp how he had managed to become a Red Knight in his past life, especially given the limitations of his former body. After completing his training, he commanded the status window to open. As expected, his mastery skill had reached the expert level. But what intrigued him more was the pattern. Each time a skill advanced in rank, its mastery level reset, allowing him to refine them repeatedly. His swift step skill, the same technique he had used to defeat Reina, had also improved. He could sense his butler, Decker, watching him closely. Moments later, Decker informed him it was time to prepare. Departure for the blessing rite was in 2 hours. It had been a long time since Zeke last visited the Draker family's main estate, located within the Duchy of Troy. While the family's central residence was at the heart of the continent, the blessing rite was held at the legendary site of the Dragon Slayer's Tail. Upon arrival, he stepped out of the carriage and into the dragon's nest lair. As he made his way inside, he quickly realized the significance of those in attendance. The room was filled with VIPs of extraordinary influence. Some, he was certain, were envoys sent to observe him. But Zeke was confident. Once his awakening was revealed, their expectations would be shattered. However, his confidence wavered the moment his gaze locked onto a particular man. A man whose very presence made his blood boil. Abel. Shaking hands with another guest, Abel seemed disinterested in the event itself. That is, except for one thing, his youngest brother. The Draker family's second son was known as the Lion Blade, but Zeke knew him by a far more infamous title, the Butchering Knight. Facing his older brother, Zeke forced himself to remain composed. Right now, there wasn't much else he could do. In his previous life, the second son had never attended the blessing rite to witness Zeke's awakening. This meant that his actions in the Pancration competition had altered the course of fate. Clenching his fists in frustration, he came to a realization. This change was an opportunity. Before long, the ceremony began. Aaron was called forward as the first warrior to undergo the ritual. Stepping up without hesitation, he placed his arm into a mystical pool. Almost instantly, blue energy surged through his body. An elder explained that every Draker descendant had their aura sealed until their graduation from the cradle, which happened at the age of 12. This awakening process was what set them apart. Compared to ordinary knights who could only awaken in their 20s, the Draker bloodline achieved this power at an astonishing speed. But even among the Draker elite, only a handful awakened a special trait, mana inhibition, a signature ability of the Dragon Slayer lineage. The glowing mana lamps surrounding the pool flickered violently, emitting bursts of red sparks. This was a clear sign. Aaron had undergone a pure blood awakening. Knights who possessed mana inhibition could rival even the formidable red and black knights. However, their bodies became highly resistant to mana, to the point where everyday life became difficult. Special gloves, crafted by the Draker family, were necessary to suppress the effect. A prime example stood before them, Reina, who had already undergone her awakening. She now wore gloves at all times, a testament to the power and burden of pure blood knights. Once a candidate proved their pure blood status, they were officially recognized as part of the Draker family, gaining unlimited resources, authority, and the best training available. The murmurs in the audience grew louder. It was finally time for the most anticipated awakening of the ceremony. Zeke Draker. Whispers filled the air. Many believe his awakening would surpass even Reina's. As Zeke stepped forward, he felt a strange sense of déjà vu. He had stood in this very spot before. In his previous life, this day had brought him nothing but shame and disappointment. The blessing rite had been the only thing allowing him to continue in the cradle, but the experience had left him humiliated. But now, everything was different. He was no longer weak. He had learned to heal, control ether, and fight on his own terms. He had developed resilience, strength, and the will to carve out his own path. And so, as he stood before the bronze statue, he was filled with anticipation. This time, he expected it to grant him something extraordinary. As Zeke dipped his arm into the pool, the bronze statue reacted immediately. It trembled violently before coming to a sudden halt. The entire room fell into stunned silence. This had never happened before. Not once in the history of the blessing rite. Even Abel, known for his unshakable composure, was momentarily speechless. Pulling his arm back, Zeke already knew the outcome. Nothing had changed. Despite everything, despite his efforts and growth, the results were the same. He had let Abel's presence cloud his judgment. He had convinced himself that this time would be different. But deep down, he had known the truth all along. The onlookers erupted into whispers, their initial or replaced with mockery. The most anticipated candidate had failed to awaken. Sneers spread through the crowd. A direct descendant of the Draker bloodline. And yet, he showed no signs of an awakening? It didn't make sense. The murmurs grew harsher. Some even began questioning his victory over Reyna, convinced now that he must have relied on tricks or deception. But Zeke? He couldn't care less. Instead of wasting time on their judgment, he turned his focus inward, determined to find another way to grow stronger. Just then, the system interrupted his thoughts. System error. Apologies. Critical information was missing from class identification. Zeke's eyes narrowed. What? Before he could process it, the system continued. Input complete. Terminal identification successful. User talent confirmed, healer. At that moment, a surge of power coursed through him. His class had officially unlocked, but it didn't stop there. A second message followed. Rare class unlocked. The bronze statue erupted in light. Red light. The unmistakable sign of a pure blood awakening. Gasps filled the chamber. No one could believe what they were seeing. How was this possible? A direct jump to Red Knight status? The system's connection deepened, unlocking something hidden within Zeke's soul, the ancient dragon's blessing. Abel watched it all unfold, his expression unreadable. He remained still, observing his younger brother with a calculating gaze. Then another shift. The system wasn't done. Zeke's existing talents fused together, morphing into something completely new. His screen updated once more, revealing a title unlike anything he had ever seen. Unique class unlocked. The Immortal. A golden shimmer enveloped him, drawing even more attention. The spectators, still reeling from the red light, now had another mystery to unravel. Some wanted to believe the statue was malfunctioning, but how could that explain the mana lamps reacting to his awakening? No mana inhibition had appeared, so they were desperate to dismiss this as a false pure blood awakening. But even they weren't convinced by their own words. That's when Abel moved. With a slow, deliberate clap, he shattered the tension in the room. Mocking amusement laced his voice as he questioned why no one had congratulated the newly awakened pure blood. His applause wasn't a request. It was an order, and with no choice but to obey, the rest of the hall followed. One by one, the murmurs died out, replaced by the reluctant sound of applause. Abel didn't hesitate. He demanded that a pair of gloves be prepared for his younger brother. Zeke received them, but held back a scoff. He had no need for these. Still, without a word, he turned and walked away. Abel, on the other hand, looked pleased. But Zeke was anything but. Of all people, it had to be Abel offering him help. The thought alone made his blood boil. With the blessing rite concluded, the ceremony transitioned into a celebration, an event meant for the guests to enjoy. But Zeke had no intention of joining in. He wasn't here to socialize. Just as he was about to leave, a voice called out his name. He froze. This wasn't part of the plan. He hadn't expected Abel to appear so suddenly. His older brother casually questioned where he was heading. Then, much to Zeke's disgust, extended a hand in congratulations. Zeke hated Abel, but outright rejecting the handshake in front of everyone could cause unnecessary trouble. Forcing a polite expression, he reached out to shake it, and stopped. A flash of blood, a memory from his past life. His body reacted before his mind could process it. He retracted his hand. Not saying a word, he simply stood there. A slow smirk played across Abel's lips. His voice remained light, but there was a sharpness to it. Well, this is awkward. I believe my dear little brother just embarrassed me. Zeke clenched his jaw. He couldn't shake this man's hand. Not after everything. Not after knowing what kind of monster Abel truly was. But Abel? He barely seemed to care. With a small wave, he turned away. No matter. I'm sure we'll meet again soon. Zeke agreed. One day he would face Abel, but on his own terms. At the celebration party, the nobles and warriors alike were abuzz with discussion. Two pure blood awakenings in a single ceremony? Unheard of. But Zeke's awakening remained a mystery. No one had ever seen a golden light before. What did it mean? Was it some kind of advanced awakening? Yet despite being the center of attention, Zeke was nowhere to be found. That's because he had slipped away, choosing solitude over meaningless chatter. Sitting in a quiet room, he exhaled, finally free from the suffocating social scene. But his mind remained restless. There was something strange. He wasn't experiencing mana inhibition. Pure blood awakenings were supposed to reject mana entirely. The Draker family prided itself on its defiance against dragons, who were the source of all mana. To prove this, every pure blood awakener required special gloves, as their bodies could no longer interact with mana-based tools and devices. Yet here he was completely unaffected. Taking off his gloves, he flexed his fingers. Nothing. No resistance, no rejection. Something wasn't adding up. His status window materialized before him, and he immediately noticed the difference. His trait wasn't mana inhibition. It was something else entirely. Trait: mana reflection. Frowning, Zeke tapped for more details. Mana reflection generates a distortion field that nullifies nearby mana. Unlike mana inhibition, this skill is not passive and does not interfere with standard mana readings. His mind raced. That explained everything. The mana lamps didn't react to him like they did to pure bloods, because he wasn't rejecting mana. He was distorting it. Then there was the matter of his class. Before the blessing rite, the system had labeled him as a rare class healer. But now he was something entirely different. Class, the Immortal. Zeke leaned back, deep in thought. None of this made sense. At the graduation ceremony, every Draker Awakener had emerged with a blue aura, a standard result for their bloodline. The only exception had been Reyna, who had awakened as a Red Knight. And now there was him, a Golden Light, a class called Immortal, a trait that wasn't supposed to exist. Whatever had happened during his awakening, it wasn't normal. Just like before, Zeke's case followed the same pattern, until something changed. His classification shifted from bronze to gold. However, the system flagged a problem. It lacked crucial information about classification. That's when Zeke started piecing things together. He wondered if the system had been treating the bronze statue as the classification terminal during the awakening. As soon as the missing data was injected into the terminal, the statue reacted intensely, glowing red. Things were finally making sense. The statue wasn't meant to determine whether someone had awakened. It was there to judge their class. A red glow signified a rare class, while gold indicated a unique one. More importantly, this statue was an ancient relic, existing long before Tarakan, the founder of the Draker family. Nowadays, class identification wasn't even a thing, which led to a major misunderstanding. People assumed the red light symbolized pure blood awakening, but in truth, it meant achieving a rare class. Even the current head of the clan wasn't aware of this. Meanwhile, Zeke noticed something unexpected. He had gained 100 karma points. He figured they must have been awarded during the ceremony and wasted no time putting them to use. His choice? The draconian skill. The moment he made the purchase, a surge of knowledge flooded in. He gained several beginner abilities: Dragon Eyes, Might of the Dragon, and Devour. The first two made perfect sense, but Devour? Its only function seemed to be aiding digestion, which sounded like a waste. Not wanting to gamble, he focused on the skills that seemed more useful. Might of the Dragon required aura to activate, making it a riskier choice, so he decided to test Dragon Eyes first. At first, nothing seemed different. His senses didn't pick up anything unusual until he turned to look outside. Staring at the statue in the garden, he realized the skill dramatically enhanced his vision, letting him see distant objects as if they were up close. But that wasn't all. He could now access detailed information about anything he observed. A flood of data rushed through him, revealing intricate details about the statue's composition. The sheer amount of information overwhelmed him, leaving him completely drained. If every use of his powers came with this kind of drawback, he'd have to be careful. Thankfully, his body's natural healing kicked in, restoring his stamina. What really caught him off guard was that he hadn't even tried to activate healing. It just happened on its own. Checking the system, he found another surprise. All of his class skills had automatically converted into passive abilities, and they had already leveled up. Zeke's healing factor had evolved. Unlike before, it now repaired his body automatically without him having to activate it. While it seemed overpowered, it wasn't something he could use endlessly. Otherwise, he wouldn't have died in the past. The ability was infinite in nature, but not without limits. To test it, he took a blade and lightly cut his arm. Within seconds, the wound vanished without a trace, as if it had never been there. Most students took 5 years to graduate from the academy, but Zeke was confident he could do it in 2. The Draker Academy was the most prestigious knight academy in existence. Anyone dreaming of knighthood would do anything to secure a spot there. Located in the city of Troy, the academy came to life every semester with the arrival of new students. As Zeke walked among them, he noticed how the higher-ranked students carried themselves like full-grown adults. They were strong, capable, and leagues above the average recruit. But compared to the warriors from the cradle, they were nothing, just privileged children from influential families. He couldn't help but think his whole family was beyond messed up. Among the powerful branch families supporting the Draker lineage, 3 stood above the rest. The first was the Turin family, known for their raw strength, Reina's family. The second was the Zimmons family, revered for their wisdom. And lastly, the Vardek family, masters of wealth and gold. Their heirs were all present at the academy, but Zeke had no interest in them. The scene shifted to the prestigious dormitory, Platinum Mansion. This elite residence offered top-tier training halls, a vast library, and state-of-the-art facilities reserved for the best students. But pureblood awakeners like Zeke were given something even more exclusive, the title of Floor Master, granting them authority over the Platinum Floor. Upon arrival, he was greeted by a maid and led to his assigned area, where several people were already waiting. Seeing the crowd left him slightly drained. Despite his status as a pure-blood awakener, he was immediately informed that Decker was expecting him in another room. Without wasting time, he went to see what his butler had for him. Decker presented him with a pair of premium gloves, one Zeke had received upon awakening. He had already acquired a new set, but his focus was now on something more important, a sword. The butler fully supported his decision. Troy was close to the mountain ranges, which made it a prime location for high-quality iron and master craftsmen. These artisans were a crucial asset to the Academy's knights. Decker offered to find a skilled craftsman for him, but Zeke wanted to handle it personally. He asked Decker to set up an appointment in advance so he could meet them himself. The name Galleon Halbert was completely unfamiliar to even Decker. Still, Zeke intended to set up a meeting with this mysterious craftsman. At the same time, Decker reminded him to review the academy documents before his first class the next day. Later that evening, Zeke was busy going through his notes when he made an interesting realization. The Platinum Floor was exclusively his. That meant he had the perfect space to train and develop his draconian skills without any interruptions. Just then, a maid arrived with an unexpected message. Reina had invited him to dinner. Caught off guard, Zeke decided to accept the invitation. When he arrived at her floor, he found himself momentarily thrown off. Reina had set up a dinner scene straight out of a gangster film. She welcomed him with a smirk, apologizing for the unusual setting, but Zeke wasn't too concerned. He took a seat, and they agreed to eat first and talk later. As they dined, Zeke observed her closely. Even in a casual setting, she was channeling aura into her lower abdomen. It didn't take long for him to figure out why. She was likely aiming to become a purple knight. If that was the case, it would explain why her swordsmanship had already reached its peak. In his eyes, that kind of potential could be put to better use. By the time they finished eating, Zeke felt drained and mildly impressed by how much more Reina had eaten than him. But now that their appetites were satisfied, she was ready to get to the real reason for inviting him. Reina offered him the full support of the Turin family. Zeke immediately sensed a misunderstanding and reminded her that they were both pure-blood awakeners. However, she was quick to shut him down, claiming that he had the wrong idea. Being a pure-blood awakener came with privileges, access to the platinum floor, for example, but it also had a downside. While others had access to centuries of academic and combat knowledge, as well as personal instructors to refine their abilities, pure bloods didn't get those same structured growth opportunities. Without proper support, even the most talented could fall behind. To make her point, she brought up Abel Draker, a pure blood from their family and the youngest person to ever earn the title of White Knight. Now, he stood among the strongest Black Knights, and even he had relied on the Simmons family's backing. Reyna then revealed that the patriarch of the Turin family had given absolute orders. She was to extend the Turin family's support to Zeke. She reiterated her offer, expecting him to see reason. But Zeke, in the mood to mess with her expectations, simply declined. His calm refusal left Reyna visibly stunned. She couldn't understand how he could turn down such an advantageous deal. Getting up from his seat, Zeke made it clear he wasn't interested. Not in alliances, not in politics. Apart from being a pure-blood awakener, none of this concerned him. With that, he turned and left, leaving Reyna in disbelief. As a way of repaying Reyna for the meal, Zeke decided to offer her a personal piece of advice. He pointed out that her sword was too powerful, almost unnaturally so, which likely had something to do with the people backing her. But more importantly, her true strength wasn't in brute force. It was in her adaptability. Instead of clashing head-on, he suggested she focus on using her fluid movements to redirect opponents, striking with a single, precise attack when the moment was right. If she could master that, she'd surpass her current limits with ease. With that, he turned and left, leaving Reyna frustrated. She had always relied on her family's legacy of raw strength, training tirelessly to live up to their name. But Zeke had a point. No one had ever given her advice before. Ever since she was young, she had been praised as a genius, but never guided. This brief exchange forced her to reconsider her opinion of Zeke Draker. Meanwhile, Zeke was having his own moment of reflection. His growth had been insane. Even after training all night, he wasn't even remotely tired. With infinite stamina now, he was literally built to last, far beyond anything he could have imagined in his past life. Back then, this academy had been nothing but hell for him. But now, it wasn't so bad. In fact, he was actually enjoying the rare peace. Unfortunately, that peace didn't last. Owen Simmons, the third son of the Simmons family, suddenly approached him. In his previous life, Owen was a master manipulator, a schemer who blackmailed and bullied him relentlessly. And just like before, he had extended a dinner invitation, only to be flat-out ignored. The strange part? This time around, Owen was acting way too friendly. Zeke immediately understood what invitation he was talking about and responded with a sharp remark. Owen questioned why he hadn't bothered to reply, to which Zeke coolly shot back that he didn't give a damn about pointless messages. That blunt response instantly drew the attention of Owen's companion, who thought Zeke was being unnecessarily rude. But Zeke wasn't interested in playing nice. He hit him with the classic, "Who the hell are you?" and didn't even bother remembering his name. As far as he was concerned, the guy was nothing more than a bootlicker trying to get on Owen's good side. Apparently, that was enough to set the guy off. Without warning, he launched an attack at Zeke. But Zeke wasn't caught off guard. He reacted instantly, blocking the strike, even though it was laced with aura manipulation. Durbin Roswell roared his name, declaring himself the mightiest of them all. Yeah, maybe the mightiest refrigerator. Zeke couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. This guy wasn't even a knight, barely even a cadet. Not wasting another second, Zeke shot forward with blinding speed, driving a devastating hook into Durbin's abdomen, one that could put Mike Tyson to shame. The impact sent him crashing face-first into the ground. Without missing a beat, Zeke casually invited the next Simmons lackey to step up and get humbled. Owen, however, simply walked forward and stated that he wasn't impressed by Zeke flaunting his strength. The group eventually left, but to Zeke, they were nothing more than a traveling circus act. Now, let's break down the structure of Draker Academy. The academy was divided into two classes, The first was the normal class, where cadets lacking talent trained through sheer effort and discipline. It was a tough but straightforward path. The second was the special class, where the more capable cadets could choose their own specialized subjects beyond the basics. This was where the academy's elites gathered, the so-called top-tier students. Zeke had high expectations for the people who'd end up here, but as he scanned the room, disappointment set in. None of them were particularly impressive. In fact, most of them were just alumni from the cradle, people he already knew. He couldn't help but joke to himself that this wasn't a special class at all, just a cradle class. Class soon began, and the instructor at the podium had a big announcement. Today, they had a special guest, a man who once held the title of Commander-in-Chief of the Empire, a war strategist who, 2 decades ago, was credited with blocking an imperial invasion through sheer tactical brilliance. The very person who ran this academy, Dean Howard Draker. The room welcomed him with enthusiasm. To the world, he was a war hero, a symbol of hope, a tactical mastermind whose name was praised throughout the Empire. But Zeke knew the truth. Howard Draker was no hero. He was a fraud. The only reason he had saved the Empire was because he had leaked critical information to the enemy for his own survival. Pure luck had let him slip out unscathed, and now he basked in undeserved glory. Zeke despised him. Howard was the reason Zeke had been expelled from the academy in his past life. After that, with nowhere to go, he had wandered the streets of Troy, lost and aimless, until he was captured by slave traders and sold to the Southern Cartel. The mere existence of this man was a reminder of the worst chapter in Zeke's life. And someday, he was going to make him pay. For now, Howard wrapped up his speech, and the teacher stepped in to begin the lesson. The cadets are summoned to the arena for an indoor training session. Zeke is less than thrilled. He's expected to sit through the basics of dragon slaying, something that frustrated him in his past life. Back then, he couldn't wield aura and wasted 2 years on what should have taken only 3 months. Their instructor introduces himself as the Rose Knight, Draker. The students aren't impressed since they don't recognize his name. But Zeke does. Andre wasn't born into an Awakener bloodline, yet he graduated as Valhalla Academy's valedictorian. His raw talent earned him the prestigious Draker name, despite having no family ties. In short, this guy is the definition of someone to worry about. Zeke also remembers that while the special class instructors vary in skill, Andre is infamous for his terrible attitude. Andre gets straight to the point, instructing the cadets to draw their swords. His gaze locks on Zeke's weapon. It's massive compared to the others, yet Zeke wields it effortlessly. Andre, unimpressed, calls him into the arena, assuming the oversized sword is a sign of arrogance. That's exactly what Zeke wanted. He boldly claims he could defeat the instructor with it, an open provocation that visibly unsettles Andre. The tension is thick, enough to trigger Zeke's system, activating a mental defense skill. Amused by the challenge, Andre decides to give him a practical lesson. He even sets a condition. If Zeke wins, he'll have complete freedom in class. To make things fair, Andre promises to hold back and won't use aura. But that just plays into Zeke's hands. He knows Andre's weaknesses and is confident in his ability to exploit them. However, with his watchful brother observing, Zeke doesn't want to attract too much attention. His plan? Land a single, precise cut on Andre's uniform, just enough to make a point, before strategically accepting defeat. The fight begins with Zeke wasting no time. He swings directly at Andre's neck, but the instructor effortlessly deflects the attack, showcasing the refined skills of a Blue Knight. Zeke quickly realizes this won't be an easy battle. He dashes around, striking from every angle, only for each attempt to be blocked with near-perfect precision. The cadets watch in stunned silence as Andre holds his ground, fending off Zeke's relentless assault for a full 30 minutes. However, something isn't right. Andre's grip tightens as his blade quivers, and exhaustion starts creeping in. He can't understand how Zeke is still moving without even a hint of fatigue. Even though he's suppressing his own power, this fight is proving more difficult than expected. It becomes clear just how overwhelming a pure-blooded Draker Awakener truly is. It's almost unfair to compare them to others. Zeke, on the other hand, is fully exploiting Andre's one major weakness, his stamina. The Draker family's unique aura cultivation requires constant activation, even during rest. For someone like Andre, suppressing it feels unnatural and weakens him. Zeke is using that to his advantage. Andre deflects another strike, but Zeke refuses to accept defeat. His pride won't allow him to lose unless Andre is forced to use aura. Changing his approach, he stops trying to create openings and instead pushes for an all-or-nothing scenario, one that will force Andre to unleash his full power. Zeke suddenly flips back, then launches forward at blinding speed. It's swift step and advanced movement skill. Andre barely has time to react as Zeke maneuvers into his blind spot. Then, in a flash, Zeke activates Critical Strike, pouring everything into this single attack. For the first time, Andre hesitates. A cadet shouldn't be able to use such an advanced technique. But in the split second before impact, he instinctively channels the faintest amount of aura into his feet, allowing him to dodge with lightning speed. Without missing a beat, he retaliates with Sky Slice. The sheer force of the attack sends Zeke flying. His sword cracks, and the damage is severe enough to trigger his flawed healing factor. Despite the regeneration, his body gives out, and he collapses onto the arena floor. Andre sheathes his sword and turns away, visibly frustrated. Andre officially announces that Zeke is exempt from the class. He even asks if anyone else is brave enough to challenge him, but after witnessing Zeke's brutal defeat, no one dares to step forward. With that, the lesson resumes for the rest of the cadets, except for Zeke, who's now resting in the infirmary, reflecting on his fight. His original plan to slice Andre's uniform may have failed, but forcing the instructor to use aura was an even bigger win. He made Andre acknowledge his strength, proving himself in a way he hadn't anticipated. That final attack, Sky Slice, was actually the most basic technique of the dragon slaying arts. Yet, when amplified by a Blue Knight's power, it became a devastating blow. Even so, Zeke held his own. His unlimited stamina and healing factor kept him standing against an opponent at that level. But those advantages alone won't be enough. If he truly wants freedom, he needs absolute power, the kind that makes him untouchable even by those above him. As he's lost in thought, an unexpected visitor stumbles into the room, a drunkard. The man, reeking of alcohol, seems oddly interested in Zeke. What's more unsettling is that Zeke never even sensed his presence. The last thing he expected to see in the infirmary was a drunk, and things only get weirder when the man casually insults the Draker family patriarch. Zeke tries to get a read on him, but the man is too busy downing more booze. Then, out of nowhere, he questions Zeke about his rapid regeneration, clearly aware of his unnatural healing ability. Alarm bells go off in Zeke's head. The Academy shouldn't know about this. His system immediately activates mental defense. Playing dumb, Zeke pretends not to understand what the man is talking about. But the stranger isn't buying it. Without warning, he lunges at Zeke with a palm strike sharp enough to slice through the bed. Zeke quickly evades, now convinced this guy might be an assassin. Thinking fast, he whips the bedsheet at the lunatic to blind him. But the sense of danger only escalates, forcing him to go all in. He activates every skill at his disposal, launching an all-out attack. Yet, despite being blinded, the man effortlessly catches Zeke's blade. Instead of retaliating, he simply smirks and praises Zeke's quick adaptability. Zeke stumbles back, wary of the man's words. Mercenary? What does he mean by that? Could this guy know something about his past? The stranger watches him closely. Seeing a Draker throw away his sword to save his own skin, he scoffs. In his eyes, Zeke is better suited to be a mercenary than a knight. The realization clicks. This guy sees right through him. And worse, Zeke can tell the power gap between them is massive. If this man wanted to kill him, it wouldn't even be a struggle. He's at least on par with the Red Knight. Then, the man gestures towards Zeke's heavy claymore, assuming he just picked it up from the Academy's basic supply. With Zeke's level of talent, wielding such a weapon is a complete waste. The way he speaks, so casually dismissing his potential, makes Zeke even more certain of one thing. This guy is far stronger than he initially thought. Before he can think further, a familiar voice cuts through the air. Andre has arrived. To Zeke's shock, Andre calls out the stranger's name, Dexter. Zeke struggles to believe it. Meanwhile, Dexter smirks, questioning how Andre even managed to track him down. The knight simply recalls spotting him in the training room earlier. Then, without hesitation, he turns to Zeke. If you're healed already, get lost. Zeke awkwardly prepares to leave, but Dexter suddenly stops him. With an amused expression, he offers a proposition. If Zeke wants to actually learn something useful, he should come to the Academy's western greenhouse. A moment of silence lingers. Then Zeke, ever the arrogant one, declines outright and walks away. Dexter sighs, shaking his head. That attitude, so much like his father's. Nostalgia creeps in. Zeke, however, is already piecing things together. If this so-called gardener can speak so casually about Arthur, the Draker family patriarch, then there's only one explanation. Dexter isn't just some mysterious figure. He's the legendary Duke Draker, the Gale Knight. The realization hits hard. This is the same man who once took on an entire kingdom alone. One of the rare knights capable of wielding martial force. A warrior so unpredictable that he supposedly became a Black Knight just because he liked the color black. And yet, despite his reputation, he vanished without a trace, only to turn up here, living a quiet life at the Academy. Zeke glances back at Andre. Maybe he ended up at the Academy because of Dexter too. But none of that matters to Zeke. He isn't interested in basic training. He isn't looking for mere lessons. If he's going to learn from Dexter, it won't be for something small. It has to be the man's ultimate technique. A smirk tugs at Zeke's lips. His greed for power shifts into sheer determination. If he's going to pursue this, he won't settle for anything less than everything. At the Magic Academy, Professor Fannin awkwardly continues his lecture, glancing at the students for any sign of engagement. Any questions? He asks, though he already knows the answer. The entire class is either dozing off or barely paying attention. It's disheartening, but he presses on. Then, to his surprise, a single hand goes up. Zeke questions him about the mana energy transfer law he just mentioned. Fannin's demeanor shifts instantly. Excitement replaces his usual awkwardness. It's the first time in ages that a student has actually cared. He eagerly explains the concept in detail, taking his time to ensure Zeke fully understands. After class, the students complain about the subject being too theoretical, with most treating it as nothing more than designated nap time. Zeke, however, has a completely different takeaway. He found it incredibly easy to grasp and now sees Fannin in a new light. This guy is actually competent. As Zeke is about to leave, Fannin stops him. With a rare moment of sincerity, he thanks Zeke for his curiosity. It's been ages since he's been able to properly teach a passionate student. He even extends an offer. Zeke can come to him anytime if he ever has questions. Surprisingly, Fannin admits he's still an alumnus at Delphoa Magic University, the birthplace of modern magic. That piques Zeke's interest. He hadn't expected the professor to have such a strong academic background. Deciding there's no harm in keeping a skilled mage close, Zeke accepts the offer. In his mind, magic users who excel at math tend to be great thinkers. Better to have a clever mage as an ally than another uptight knight. He figures Fannin might prove useful in the future. The moment he steps out of the academy, his thoughts are interrupted. Dexter is waiting. And judging by the look on his face, his patience is gone. Finally done? Dexter asks, arms crossed. Before Zeke can even answer, he cuts him off. Why the hell didn't you show up at the greenhouse? Clearly, Dexter was expecting him to get the hint when he first offered to teach something useful. But Zeke just shrugs and bluntly repeats himself. He's not interested. Dexter's irritation spikes. He starts acting like a petulant child, but Zeke remains firm. He acknowledges that Dexter is no ordinary person, but he's too focused on his own training right now. Dexter seems to accept this until he suddenly doesn't. Without warning, he vanishes from Zeke's sight. Before Zeke can react, he feels a sharp impact. His vision goes black. When he finally regains consciousness, he's somewhere else entirely. Blinking, he takes in his surroundings. The western greenhouse. Dexter, standing over him, sighs. Finally awake? Zeke crosses his arms. You do realize this is blatant abduction, right? Dexter, unfazed, just shrugs. Yeah, and? He smirks, making it clear. He's openly interested in Zeke and isn't even trying to hide it anymore. No patience whatsoever, Zeke thinks. But he's not sticking around. Without hesitation, he activates swift steps and bolts. Or at least he tries. In the blink of an eye, Dexter is in front of him, cutting off his escape. Annoyed but not deterred, Zeke makes another run for it, only to fail again. Dexter easily keeps up, shutting down every attempt to flee. Not wanting to be treated like a helpless kid, Zeke changes tactics. With a smirk, he teases, "What is it about me that's so fascinating to you, huh?" Dexter doesn't even hesitate. "That crazy healing of yours." Zeke grins. "So that's what this is about." He decides to push the challenge further. "Well then, if you want answers, you'll have to force them out of me." Dexter disappears. Zeke tenses, eyes darting around. Where did he? A sword whistles through the air, aimed straight at his back. He barely manages to catch it in time. Holding the weapon steady, he narrows his eyes. What is he trying to prove? Taking a stance, he demands an explanation. But Dexter just smirks again. "You started this challenge," he reminds him. "But that's boring. So let's make it interesting." He sets the terms. If Zeke can land even one strike on his clothes, he wins. His reward? His wish granted. But if he loses, Dexter's expression shifts, sharp and terrifying. "You tell me everything you're hiding." For 3 relentless hours, Zeke fights with everything he has. But Dexter isn't just fast, he's untouchable. No matter how many times Zeke strikes, he can't land a hit. Yet he refuses to give up. His endless stamina and regeneration keep him going, making him nearly unstoppable. Dexter starts to take notice. This isn't just a kid with insane endurance. He never stops coming back. Every injury is healed, every setback erased in seconds. Still, Zeke knows sheer stamina alone won't bring him victory. If I want to win, I need something stronger. A thought crosses his mind. The might of the dragon. A skill so powerful, he never dared to use it before. Too risky. Too dangerous. But against this opponent, his gaze hardens. No more holding back. As he rises, his entire presence shifts. His aura crackles with raw intensity. Dexter notices the change immediately. That's more like it. Excited, he watches as Zeke's body surges with purple energy. Swift steps activates again, and this time his movements are sharper, more precise. Faster than before. Dexter acknowledges the improvement, but remains unimpressed. "Not bad, but I've fought people way faster than you," he muses. Yet something else catches his attention. Zeke's eyes. The look in them isn't just determination. It's something more. Something vicious. Dexter likes it. He decides to humor him, activating a sliver of his own aura. But just as he does, Zeke unleashes might of the dragon. And for the first time, Dexter is caught off guard. Dexter manages to break his sword and force him back, but confusion sets in. He isn't sure what just happened. Using the thick dust cloud around him as cover, he wonders if Zeke used some kind of technique to mess with his vision. Confident that the dense screen will keep him hidden, he assumes Zeke won't be able to track him. However, with dragon eyes, Zeke locks onto his presence and strikes from behind. This time, he finally lands a hit, but in an instant, the Black Knight vanishes, leaving Zeke stunned. Realization dawns on him. This must be the Duke's secret move, an ability that lets him shift positions instantly, stirring up a gust of wind in the process. Now, he understands why Dexter is known as the Gale Knight. While Zeke is still processing it all, Dexter suddenly appears behind him. With minimal effort, he declares the fight a draw before completely overwhelming Zeke and ending the battle. The system immediately alerts Zeke that his fatigue has exceeded safe limits due to excessive skill usage. His body can't handle it anymore. His consciousness is forcefully shutting down. His vision fades as he struggles to move, but he can't fight it. Hours later, he regains consciousness in his own room, likely brought back by the Duke himself. Though frustrated over his defeat, he acknowledges that losing to the Black Knight was inevitable. He had thrown everything he had at him, but it still wasn't enough. Zeke recalls his strategy, repeating the same attack pattern to lower Dexter's guard before switching things up at the last second with the full force of the dragon's power. Even with that, he barely managed a single hit. He's certain the move Dexter used at the end was his trump card. Regret washes over him. If only he hadn't overused his draconian skills, he might have stayed conscious long enough to learn more. But at least he got to witness that secret technique firsthand. That ridiculous speed, paired with Dexter's honed physique, was the same skill that allowed Andre to rise through the ranks despite his weak stamina. Zeke wishes he could have learned it himself, but for now, he's somewhat satisfied. One thing is certain. Might of the Dragon was strong enough to make even a Black Knight hesitate. If he ever uses it against weaker opponents, they won't stand a chance. Zeke receives a system notification. Curious, he checks his status and discovers that Swift Steps has leveled up. Not only that, but his soul has developed, unlocking new system functions that he can now access using karma points. Scrolling through the options, he's surprised to see features like a mini-map, an inventory, and a quest book, all available if he has enough points. Taking his time to understand everything, he decides to unlock the inventory first. The system explains how it works. He can store and retrieve items just by thinking of their name or shape. To test it, he selects his sword. The moment he activates the function, the claymore vanishes from his hand and appears in the inventory window. Impressed, Zeke tries summoning it back. With just a thought, the claymore instantly reappears in his grasp. He had assumed it was just a basic storage space, but it's far more advanced than he expected. He remembers struggling to find a safe place for valuable artifacts in his past life. If only he had this back then. The system also reveals that he can expand his storage capacity by using more karma points. Surprisingly, this entire function is just a low-rank administrator skill. That realization leaves him wondering, what kind of powers will he unlock once he reaches the high-rank administrator level? Understanding that karma points are incredibly valuable, he decides to be careful with how he spends them. As he starts reconsidering his plans, there's a knock at the door. Dexter steps in, asking for permission to enter. Zeke, a bit surprised, allows him inside. The butler delivers a message, saying Zeke will understand its meaning once he hears who it's from. The Garden Keeper. That name makes Zeke pause, then smile. It confirms that his efforts weren't in vain. As he reads the invitation, Dexter assures him he can return for another challenge whenever he's ready. Zeke can't help but feel a surge of excitement. After all, the man called their fight a draw before completely overwhelming him. That means he still has a chance to prove himself. Before leaving, Dexter shares one more update. He managed to track down the blacksmith Zeke mentioned. But when Zeke asks about setting an appointment, the butler awkwardly admits that it didn't go as planned. The blacksmith outright refused. Zeke is shocked to learn that the blacksmith has completely given up forging weapons. The next day, he arrives at a familiar shop, the same blacksmith's forge he used to visit in his past life. Seeing the old, amusing sign brings back memories as he steps inside and calls out. His mind drifts back to the legendary sword he once wielded, the Radiance of Graham, a true masterpiece. It was crafted by Galleon, the very man he's here to see. Back then, the blacksmith had forged it as payment for Zeke saving his life. He was more than just a craftsman. He had earned the title Blacksmith of the Soul because of the rumors surrounding his abilities. People believed he could read a person's soul and forge the perfect weapon for them. Zeke had never doubted him. In his past life, Galleon created exactly what he needed, a sword that could replace ether with aura, a game-changing ability. Once hailed as the greatest blacksmith on the continent, it's disappointing to find him now in such a miserable state. Galleon, clearly drunk, barely looks up before barking at him to leave. This isn't a shop for kids, he grumbles. Zeke expected the man to have a rough attitude, but this level of hostility catches him off guard. Something must have happened before their fateful meeting in his past life. Without hesitation, Zeke grabs a bucket of water and dumps it over the drunk blacksmith's head. Galleon jolts upright, sputtering, as Zeke smirks. "You awake now?" he taunts, demanding an explanation for the rejection. The moment Galleon gets a proper look at him, his expression shifts. Panic sets in, and he immediately bows, apologizing over and over. He trembles, admitting he's unworthy to forge weapons anymore. If he can't even create what he wants, how could he possibly make something for others? That's why he stopped taking commissions altogether. Zeke is momentarily taken aback. Even someone as renowned as Galleon went through a downward spiral. He suddenly recalls that in his past life, the blacksmith never spoke about his struggles, likely too ashamed to admit failure. But Zeke doesn't have time to entertain this existential crisis. As Galleon spirals, he firmly snaps him out of it. The blacksmith hesitates, then apologizes again for his rude behavior. Zeke waves it off and demands to see the weapons he failed to forge. After a pause, Galleon sighs and leads him to the back of the shop. Seeing Galleon in this state, Zeke realizes he has no choice but to help the man find his way again. As they step into the backyard, Galleon awkwardly apologizes for the mess, but Zeke brushes it off, saying it actually looks cool. The blacksmith thanks him, and Zeke begins inspecting the weapons scattered around. Galleon warns him to be careful. The swords are still sharp. But as Zeke examines them closely, he quickly realizes something surprising. These weapons aren't failures at all. They're just as high quality as the ones Galleon used to forge back when he was considered the best blacksmith on the continent. Activating Dragon Eyes, Zeke peers deeper and notices a problem. He turns to Galleon and asks bluntly, "You're having issues with your brazier, aren't you?" Galleon looks stunned that he figured it out so easily, but Zeke doesn't give him time to hesitate. He demands an answer. He also points out something else. Galleon is using a unique smelting method, mixing different metals to create a material that's both lighter and stronger. To prove his point, Zeke easily snaps one of the failed swords in half. Pathetic durability, he remarks. The real problem, he explains, isn't the technique, it's the impurities. Galleon isn't removing them properly, weakening the overall structure. The blacksmith is speechless. Not only did Zeke completely see through his entire forging process in an instant, but he also identified the exact flaws with no effort at all. After a moment of silence, Galleon suddenly calls out to him. "I know this might sound strange, but I have a request." Back inside the shop, he pulls out a blueprint and lays it out in front of Zeke, revealing its details without hesitation. Zeke instantly recognizes it. The blueprint of the magic brazier. He remembers it well for his past life. This was the very design that allowed Galleon to perfect his craft. Back then, the blacksmith had trusted him enough to share his greatest secret, and now, history is repeating itself. Zeke examines the design and immediately understands. If Galleon completes this brazier, his smelting process will be flawless. But something is off. "If you already have the blueprint, why haven't you built it yet?" he asks. Galleon sighs. "I'm missing the most important component, the magic core, and the commission fee alone is 10,000 gold coins." Zeke's eyes widen. That's an absurd price. For context, even an average family only spends around 10 gold per month. This is 1,000 times that amount. No wonder it took Galleon a full decade to rise to the top in his past life. Galleon knows his request is insane, but he's desperate. Since Zeke is a Draker and a pure-blooded awakener, there's a chance he can help acquire the core. In return, the blacksmith makes a bold offer. If Zeke helps him, he'll forge any weapon he wants free of charge for as long as he lives. Zeke contemplates the request and quickly realizes the problem. It's practically impossible. He's not the family's guardian knight, meaning there's no way he can gather that kind of absurd amount. Even as a pure-blooded awakener, securing 10,000 gold coins is completely out of reach. But he needs Graham, the Sword of Radiance, and that means he has to find a way. The issue lies in the mana energy laws, and suddenly, an idea strikes him. A crazy one. Without hesitation, he accepts Galleon's request and takes the blueprint. The blacksmith still looks doubtful, but Zeke confidently assures him that he knows a mage who might be able to help. If things go well, he'll let Galleon know. As Zeke turns to leave, he orders the blacksmith to stop drinking. Instead of arguing, Galleon suddenly drops to his knees, clutching on Zeke's leg. With tears streaming down his face, He promises to serve him for the rest of his life if this actually works. He keeps repeating his gratitude, but Zeke shakes him off and exits the workshop. Draker Academy, Professorial Research Building. Zeke arrives at the research facility, still fuming over the situation. The Mage Tower scumbags have set the price outrageously high, even though the task itself doesn't seem that difficult. It's pure greed. As he walks through the halls, he remembers that Fanon's major was related to this field. If he can track down Fanon's research lab, he might find a workaround. While searching, something in a nearby alley catches his attention. A kid is getting brutally beaten by a group of bullies. Crying and begging for mercy, the boy is completely powerless. Zeke grits his teeth. This scene, I've seen it before. His past life flashes before him. This same situation played out back then, and it left a bitter taste in his mouth. Clenching his fists in frustration, he changes course and heads straight for the alley. The leader of the bullies, Leon, sneers down at the victim. "You're worthless," he spits, venting his own frustrations. His anger isn't even directed at the kid. He's still bitter over his loss to Zeke. Taking it out on someone weaker makes him feel in control again. As he stomps the kid's head into the ground, Leon snarls. That wasn't a real fight. That was a cheap shot. Pure luck. He refuses to believe that Zeke has any right to be called a pure-blooded awakener. But the moment Zeke steps into the alley and speaks, Leon's entire expression changes. The protagonist smirks arrogantly, but then, in an instant, his gaze turns ice cold. His voice drops, sharp and commanding. "If you value your life, get on your knees." Leon scoffs at his audacity, doubting that Zeke's awakening is even real. But Zeke doesn't entertain his nonsense. His tone grows even colder. "Bow down, now, or you're finished." A wave of chilling pressure washes over the alley. Leon shudders, his body locking up. Cold sweat drips down his face as a paralyzing fear grips him. Why? Why does Zeke feel so terrifying? Just a few months ago, he was nothing. But now, standing before them, he's an entirely different beast. Leon grits his teeth in frustration, his pride shattered. He snarls, calling Zeke an inferior and, in a desperate move, orders his goons to attack all at once. Zeke doesn't even flinch. A punch comes flying at him, but he easily dodges, warning them one last time. Then, without breaking a sweat, he dismantles the entire group. The first guy goes down instantly. The next one barely has time to react before he's taken out. Another comes flying toward Zeke. He simply catches him and hurls him backward. In mere moments, the entire gang is laid out. Leon watches in horror, sweating profusely. He can't believe what he's seeing. This is the same Zeke? The protagonist strides toward him, a cocky smirk on his face. "Relax," he says mockingly. "It's only going to hurt for a second." Terrified, Leon stumbles back and pulls out his sword. "Stay away," he shouts, his hands trembling. "I swear, I'll cut you if you come any closer." Zeke's expression darkens. Calmly, he reminds Leon of the rules. Drawing a weapon inside the training area comes with consequences. Leon's breath hitches. He's so panicked he forgot about that. Now, he's trapped in his own mess. Zeke doesn't let him off the hook. He draws his own sword, announcing that, by the laws of the Academy, their battle won't end until one of them is dead. The first to draw his blade carries full responsibility for whatever happens next. No one will blame the other, regardless of the outcome. To make it official, Zeke turns to one of the beaten-up goons, Liam, and declares him their witness. Just as he prepares to start the fight, Leon's composure completely shatters. "Double 8, the bully stammers. He drops to his knees, throwing his pride away as he begs for mercy. Zeke glares down at him, memories of his past life flashing through his mind. Pathetic. He coldly calls Leon a trashy scumbag. Then, in a blur, he slashes, taking only his ear. Leon screams in agony, clutching the bleeding wound, but Zeke isn't done. His voice is deadly as he warns, "Don't even think about reattaching it. If I see you again, I won't stop at just your ear." The victim, still lying on the ground, weakly calls out to Zeke. Why did you step in to help me?" Zeke brushes it off. "I wasn't helping you," he says coolly. I was helping myself. As he walks away, a strange thought crosses his mind. Was it Galleon? Did the blacksmith's words affect him more than he realized? He shakes his head, dismissing the idea. Finally, he reaches his destination and finds Fannin, the professor he was looking for. Without wasting time, Zeke asks if his request is even possible. Fannin gives a straightforward answer. It's doable. Relieved, Zeke leaves the matter in his hands and turns to leave, but Fannin stops him. Hold on, he says. You need to listen first. He explains that, while the overall design isn't complicated, the core is the real problem. The core is the heart of the machine, responsible for its power output. However, due to the circuit's strange restrictions, it requires a massive amount of energy, despite looking small. The real challenge? They also have to manipulate the energy output in real time, or the entire thing will be useless. Zeke processes everything Fannin just explained. So, is there a way to actually make it, he asks. Fannin nods. There are two options. The first method involves modifying the core's design entirely. However, Fannin warns that this process would take a decade, maybe even 15 years. Zeke is stunned. 15 years? Fannin sighs, repeating that it would take an insane amount of time. Then, he explains the second method, one that allows them to skip redesigning the core altogether by using a different material. This method would save them years of effort, but there's a catch. They need a high-compression mana stone. The moment Zeke hears those words, he jolts upright. You can't be serious? He knows exactly what that is, an ancient artifact, so rare that even modern technology can't replicate it. Fannin confirms his suspicion. That's right, and to make matters worse, finding one in a ruin is nearly impossible. If we want a stone that actually works with this design, it'll cost us 3,000 gold. Zeke falls silent. 3,000 gold. He barely managed to process 10,000 for the magic brazier. And now this? For a moment, he just stands there overwhelmed. 15 years is out of the question, but 3,000 gold isn't something he can just pull out of thin air. Worse, if anyone finds out he isn't an aura user, he'll be kicked out of the academy in an instant. Everyone assumes he's capable of wielding aura because of what happened during the blessing ceremony. But the truth? It was all an illusion, a trick using his ether and healing abilities. No matter how much he tries, he can't use aura. Unlike ether, which is impossible for normal humans to control, aura is much more accessible. That's why Graham, the Sword of Radiance, is essential. Without it, his entire future is at risk. Still lost in thought, Zeke keeps turning the problem over in his mind. There has to be another way. Fannin, meanwhile, is still marveling at the blueprint. Whoever designed this must be a genius, he muses. The efficiency is incredible. Even among relics from the Golden Age, this level of craftsmanship is extremely rare. That's when it clicks. Zeke's eyes widen as an idea takes shape. Without hesitation, he stands up. Professor, just focus on refining the design. I'll handle the rest. And with that, he heads out, determined to find his own solution. Fannin looks utterly confused. Wait, are you seriously telling me to spend 15 years reworking this design? Zeke shakes his head. No need for that. I'm bringing one. With absolute confidence, he declares that he knows how to get his hands on a high-compression mana stone. The professor is speechless. Zeke recalls the history behind these relics. The Golden Age, a time when magic reached its peak, came to an end with the Liberation War. Humanity fought to free itself from the rule of the dragons, and the war finally ended when Bahamut, the evil dragon, was slain by Turk and Draker. For a whole century, humanity enjoyed peace, but the dragon's lairs left behind contained remnants of an age long gone. These ancient relics, known as the Hero King's remnants, were beyond anything modern humans could create. Among them was the high-compression mana stone, a relic with enough energy to sustain an entire village. Draker Academy, Central Library. Zeke arrives at the Central Library, a place barely used anymore. Despite being abandoned, it's still well-maintained. After all, legend has it that hero Terrican Draker himself established it decades ago. He recalls that during the Academy's record room expansions, multiple Golden Age relics were uncovered. The Magic Tower and the Archmage of Nirvana quickly stepped in, and the discovery sent shockwaves throughout the continent. That's what happened in his past life. This time, though, the relics should still be untouched. He searches the vast library, but as expected, he doesn't find anything immediately. If these relics were that easy to locate, someone would have taken them by now. Activating Dragon Eyes, Zeke scans the room carefully. He finally spots something, a weird tile that stands out from the rest. Approaching it, he taps it, checking for any hidden mechanisms. He enables Spirit of the Soul, remembering what his master once taught him. Ether is capable of materializing, allowing the user to apply different properties, such as cut or impact. However, Ether comes with its own drawbacks. It burns through energy at an absurd rate. Just activating it drains his stamina, and he already feels the fatigue setting in. But there's no time to rest. Without hesitation, he steps through the opening behind the tile and finds himself inside a hidden cave. Lighting a fire to illuminate his surroundings, he frowns. In my past life, the discovery of these ruins happened nearly a decade later. I don't remember it being this deep underground. Just then, he hears movement. His heart pounds. Did someone uncover this place ahead of time? Peering ahead, he spots skeletons, but these aren't ordinary remains. They're moving, gripping shovels and pickaxes, as if they've been tirelessly digging for something. Immediately, he scans them with Dragon Eyes and confirms they aren't controlled by a lich. Good. That means they can be destroyed. Zeke doesn't hesitate. Activating Critical Strike, he dashes forward and launches an all-out attack, shattering the undead workers before they even sense his presence. As Zeke finishes off the skeletons, a system notification pops up. He's earned 2 karma points. He grins. In all his excitement over finding the artifact, he completely forgot about karma points. But now that he remembers, his expression shifts into something more wicked. This is the perfect chance to farm more. Wasting no time, he pushes forward, tearing through 20 more skeletons with ease, racking up additional points. Once he's satisfied, he pulls up the system menu to check what's available for purchase. Unfortunately, almost everything is still out of reach. Aside from one thing, the minimap. Without hesitation, he buys it. The system immediately updates, displaying his exact location. It looks just like a magic map, which is already impressive, but then something even more surprising happens. The minimap shifts into 3D. Zeke watches in amazement as the layout of the ruins appears before him. Then, he notices something unusual. A single room is highlighted in a different color. Curious, he selects it. The system labels it as a storage room and offers to provide the optimal route to reach it. Zeke is stunned. The search party in my past life took days to locate the storage room, and I just found it instantly. Testing it out, he follows the system's guidance, marveling at how easy it is to navigate. There's no way I'll ever get lost with this skill. He finally arrives at his destination, but there's a problem. A massive door stands in his way. Frowning, he examines it. No way this is going to open with a simple push, but might as well try. The moment his hand touches the surface, a surge of magic repels him backward. His glove catches fire, forcing him to pull back immediately. That could have taken my whole hand off. Now, it makes sense why the Archmage of Nirvana and the Magic Tower got involved when this place was discovered. Realizing he won't be able to force his way through, he turns to the system. All right, got any ideas? In response, the system connects to the security device and attempts to override it. But after a few moments, it fails. Instead, it activates the manual override. Zeke blinks. Wait, did you just reply to me? Affirmative. His eyes widen. He wasn't expecting an actual response. A crazy thought crosses his mind. If the system can answer him, maybe, just maybe, he immediately fires off a question. Why was I regressed? No response. His expression hardens. All right, then who's behind the administrator system? No response. Frustrated, he tries one last time. Who created this system? Silence. Nothing. Annoyed, he gives up. Fine. Forget it. Just open the damn door. The system confirms his request, and with a low, rumbling sound, the entrance to the Dragon Slayer storage room unlocks. The moment Zeke steps into the room, his eyes widen in disbelief. Just like in his past life, rows of chests filled with priceless relics and treasures stretch before him. Finding even one of these in ruins is nearly impossible. Yet here they are, waiting to be claimed. He methodically searches through each chest until he finally spots what he's looking for: high-compression mana stones. There are 4 in total. Without hesitation, he spends a karma point to expand his inventory and secures one. Unfortunately, his storage is still too limited to take everything, so he makes a mental note to return when he can claim it all. Just as he's about to leave, an eerie sensation washes over him. Instinctively, he glances back, and in an instant, glowing magic circles appear around him. Before he can react, the spell activates and he's teleported away. The sudden shift makes him stumble, and as he regains his footing, he quickly scans his surroundings. This place is completely unfamiliar. Turning to the system for answers, he demands to know where he is. The response is unexpected. He's now inside the home of the Dragon Slayer. Zeke racks his brain, but in his past life, he had never heard of such a place. The dimly lit room is lined with coffins, an unsettling sight. Opening his mini-map, he realizes he's not far from his previous location, yet there's no visible path linking the two. That can only mean one thing. This is an undiscovered, hidden area. Seizing the rare opportunity, he rushes to one of the coffins and pries open its heavy concrete lid. Inside, a full set of medieval armor rests in silence. The system quickly identifies it as Dragon Slayer exclusive equipment. Lifting the armor, he notices signs of wear, scratches, dents, remnants of battles long past. Something about it feels different from the Golden Age armor he's familiar with. Then his eyes catch an unusual circular hole on the back. He pieces it together instantly. This must be connected to the mana stones he just obtained. Wasting no time, Zeke accesses his storage and pulls out one of the high-compression mana stones. He's not about to let an opportunity like this slip by. As he slots the ancient relic into place, the system immediately confirms the successful installation of the mana battery. A pulse of energy surges through the armor. Its surface begins to glow as it comes to life. Watching the activation unfold, a grin spreads across Zeke's face. This discovery could change everything. A second later, the armor started glitching uncontrollably, twitching and convulsing like a malfunctioning machine. Zeke's anticipation instantly turned to alarm. Before he could react, the entire set exploded, filling the room with thick smoke. The system finally chimed in, explaining that an overload had caused a critical equipment failure. It even mentioned that it had tried to warn him about the impending explosion, but clearly, the message had arrived a little too late. The system awkwardly apologized for the delay, but at least the blast hadn't caused any serious damage. On the bright side, Zeke had confirmed one crucial fact. The high-compression mana stones were indeed the power source for these ancient armors. But that only raised more questions. What kind of insane abilities did this armor possess to require such an enormous energy supply? He made a mental note to ask Professor Fannin about it once he got out. For now, he focused on exploring the strange chamber further. The room of coffins had been eerie enough, but the other rooms turned out to be completely empty. He kept searching, eventually reaching the very last room. At first glance, it seemed just as barren as the rest, until his gaze landed on something in the center. A glass cube. The moment his eyes locked onto it, a system prompt flashed before him. His breath hitched, and for a second, his mind went blank. Then, as realization hit, sweat beaded on his forehead. This is insane. How unhinged was Terrican Draker? Inside that cube was the Founder's legacy, the heart of the cursed light dragon, Bahamut. Zeke could hardly believe it. His ancestor had actually kept the heart of the legendary dragon he had slain and left it behind as some kind of dying gift to his descendants. No wonder Zeke had felt that ominous presence back in the storage room. Though, compared to that unsettling aura, this was something else entirely. As if to confirm his thoughts, the system suddenly notified him. The heart of the cursed light dragon is reacting to your presence. At that exact moment, a dark energy surged through the air, coiling around him like invisible chains. A voice, deep, venomous, filled with malice, whispered in his mind. "You have no choice." The voice grew louder, turning into a furious roar. "Kill them all." Zeke's vision blurred. His thoughts twisted, clouded by a violent urge. His mind was slipping, until his indomitable mental defense snapped into action, shattering the trance. A sharp pain stabbed through his skull as he gasped for breath. But something was still there, lingering inside him. His body felt different. His senses fell off. Then he saw it. One of his eyes, pitch black. A cold dread crept over him. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. But the weight of what had just happened was impossible to ignore. The cube, the dragon's heart, the presence that had almost consumed him. This was beyond dangerous. Still reeling from the encounter, Zeke took an uneasy step back, fully aware that he had nearly lost himself to whatever darkness lurked inside that cursed artifact. A sudden system notification popped up, an urgent quest. Terrican Draker's test. Zeke had to defeat the powerful curse embedded within Bahamut's heart. Before he could even process the challenge, the dark presence flared up again, stronger than before. His indomitable mental defense kicked in, attempting to purge the corruption, but for the first time it failed. A surge of murderous intent crashed over him like a tidal wave. The voice that had whispered before now roared inside his skull. "Kill them all." The words drilled into his mind, demanding obedience. His vision darkened, and his body stiffened as an overwhelming force took hold. Both of his eyes turned pitch black. The voice promised him freedom, true freedom, if only he would submit. But Zeke had his own definition of freedom. With sheer force of will, he wrestled back a shred of control. Before the darkness could fully consume him, he made a split-second decision. He slammed his head against the glass cube with everything he had. Pain jolted through his skull, momentarily clearing his thoughts. Blood dripped down his face, but he grinned through the agony. "You call this freedom? What a joke." Freedom wasn't something granted. It was something won. As if in response to his defiance, the glass cube shattered into countless fragments, breaking the curse along with it. The system promptly confirmed his victory. Urgent quest complete. With that, Zeke had officially claimed Terrican Draker's dying gift. But the battle had taken a toll. Mental exhaustion crashed over him like a collapsing mountain. If his willpower had wavered even for a second, things could have ended very differently. His body, recognizing the damage, instinctively activated his healing factor and infinite stamina, rapidly working to restore him. Then, something incredible happened. The heart of Bahamut, now free, rose into the air, glowing with an intense, otherworldly light. Slowly, it drifted towards Zeke's chest. The moment it made contact, a wave of raw, domineering power surged through his entire body. Pain, unimaginable, searing pain, a dense, pure source of mana, far beyond anything he had ever encountered, flooded his system, forcing its way into every cell in his body. But there was a problem. Zeke had no mana circles to contain this massive influx of energy. With nowhere to store it, the raging power was tearing him apart from the inside. He had to act. In a desperate move, he summoned purple ether using the spirit of the soul. Channeling everything he had, he formed a miniature black hole in his palm, an improvised seal to contain the overwhelming mana. It was a reckless gamble, but with his limited skill set, it was his only shot at survival. Clenching his jaw, Zeke focused every ounce of concentration on maintaining the ether hole. The raw force inside him resisted violently, thrashing against his control. The pressure built and built until it finally detonated. A massive explosion erupted with Zeke at the center. The impact obliterated the room, leaving behind a massive crater. Smoke and debris filled the air, and for a moment, silence followed the destruction. As the dust settled, Zeke was still standing. Barely. His entire body was on fire with pain, his nerves screaming in protest. He exhaled sharply, relief washing over him as the torment finally began to subside. He had survived. His uniform was in tatters, but on his chest, something new had formed. A mark. The mark of Bahamut. The shattered remains of the glass cube had completely vanished, leaving no trace behind. Bahamut's raw mana was no joke. It was a miracle that Zeke had survived at all. His quick thinking had saved his life. As he glanced down at the broken fragments on the ground, a reflection caught his eye, the mark now imprinted on his chest. It seemed that sealing Bahamut's rampaging energy had led to some unexpected side effects. Just then, the system delivered a new notification. Absorption of the cursed light dragon's heart complete. A flood of information followed. The sheer amount of mana he had absorbed had completely transformed his body. His constitution was no longer ordinary. It had been elevated to something far beyond human. His body was now divine. However, there was a catch. The system had detected that his current abilities weren't strong enough to fully control this new power. To prevent him from self-destructing, it had forcibly compressed and sealed 95% of the energy. That wasn't all. As the inheritor of his ancestors' legacy, he had gained the right to access Terrakin Draker's secure library. Along with that, a beginner quest book had been unlocked, as well as a low-level administrator tutorial. Zeke scratched his head. A divine body? Some kind of library? A tutorial? What the hell am I supposed to do with all this? The flood of information was overwhelming, so he dismissed most of the notifications for now, except for one. The first Dragon Slayer had been feeling quite generous on his deathbed, it seemed. A new system prompt appeared before Zeke's eyes. Would you like to open Terrakin Draker's second dying gift? Just when he thought nothing could surprise him anymore. After barely escaping death in that cursed chamber, Zeke finally made it back to his mansion. He carefully secured all the treasures he had looted, but his focus remained locked on the system prompt hovering in front of him. His title had changed. The one who received the blessing of the ancient dragon. Inheritor of Terrakin Draker. With these new titles came insane perks. He now possessed draconic control and a divine body constitution. But among all his new abilities, one stood out the most: incantation. The description was brief. This lock skill will fill your words with power. That sounded absurdly strong. Still, no matter how many rewards he had gained, one fact remained. He was still too weak to use most of them. Draconic control meant he could command Dragonkin. Any dragons under his rule would follow his orders without question. The divine body, on the other hand, elevated his combat performance to an entirely new level. His learning speed for combat techniques had skyrocketed, and his ether circulation efficiency had drastically improved. But reading about it and experiencing it were two different things. If he wanted to understand his newfound power, he needed to test it in battle. Just as he was considering his next move, another system window appeared, this one still tied to Terrakin Draker. His access to the secure library had been granted, but the system required an information update before he could use it. As always, the system was happy to assist, offering to mark the update location on his minimap. Zeke wasn't thrilled about the extra errand, but it was his ancestors' legacy. He couldn't ignore it. Then, something caught his attention. The map's layout was familiar. He had seen this place before. It looked just like Valhalla. Valhalla, the most prestigious knight training institution in existence. It was a place reserved for only the most elite warriors. Even viewing its grounds was impossible for those without administrator clearance, let alone stepping inside. And as things stood now, even Zeke would have a hard time getting in. The problem? He wasn't even planning on joining Valhalla in this lifetime. But now, with something tied to Terrakin Draker's dying gift hidden within its walls, his plans might need to change. Fate seemed determined to keep him tangled up in his ancestors' legacy, whether he liked it or not. Shaking off his thoughts, Zeke shifted his attention to the beginner quest book. The tutorial for low-level administrators was about to begin. Once completed, he would gain access to a quest designed to boost his growth. Quests meant rewards. The system setup reminded him of adventurer guild missions or mercenary assignments. Curious, he asked what the tutorial entailed. He didn't even get the chance to brace himself. The tutorial started automatically. His surroundings twisted. Reality itself seemed to unravel before his eyes. Within seconds, The world around him had completely changed. Beneath his feet, glowing grid lines stretched out endlessly. The rest of his environment was nothing but an abyss of infinite darkness. Despite the surreal shift, Zeke remained calm. He scanned his surroundings, trying to make sense of where he was. Unlike the teleportation he had experienced earlier, this didn't feel like a simple relocation. It was as if the very rules of reality had been rewritten. Before he could process it further, a hostile presence surged behind him. Zeke spun around. From the darkness, orcs lunged at him, their massive spiked clubs raised for a crushing blow. At that moment, the system finally chimed in. Tutorial quest. Defeat the monsters within 60 minutes using 2 or more different skills. Completion rewards. System points plus system store unlock. Not bad. His battle instincts took over. A sword materialized in his grip just as the first wave of attacks closed in. So this tutorial is designed to make use of the system's benefits? Would have been nice if he had access to something like this before. The first 3 orcs struck simultaneously, their weapons descending from different angles, but they hit nothing. Zeke had already vanished. The sheer force of their missed attacks caused the tutorial space to ripple. Before the creatures could react, he reappeared, moving within human speed. Swift steps, continuous slash. With precise, effortless motions, he cut them down before they could even register his movements. Monsters like these? They were nothing more than practice dummies to him now. The claymore in his hands felt unbelievably light, almost weightless. This surge in strength had to be one of the perks of his divine body constitution. With this newfound power, he was confident he could take down a purple knight with ease. After effortlessly wiping out the tutorial orcs, he returned to his original spot as the separate dimension faded away. Was it just an illusion? It had felt far too real to be a simple trick. Either way, completing the tutorial had earned him a hefty reward, both a critical and time bonus. In total, he racked up a solid 400 points and unlocked access to the shop. Excited, Zeke wasted no time opening the shop tab. What he found left him stunned. The selection was incredible. Items like the giant's flesh, the breath of a flame giant, and other rare relics, all of which would cost a fortune in the market. A thought crossed his mind. Could he profit by reselling these items? Beyond buying, the shop also allowed him to sell items from his inventory. Unfortunately, his training claymore wasn't eligible, but his elven dagger was listed for just 4 points. It was frustrating. He knew it could fetch at least 100 gold pieces at an auction, yet the system valued it so low. Deciding it wasn't worth selling unless absolutely necessary, he closed the shop and called it a day. After everything that had happened, a full night's rest was well overdue. The next morning, Zeke made his way to Draker Academy's research center to meet Professor Fannin. The magic professor was in complete disbelief. Zeke had actually managed to get his hands on a high-compression mana stone in just 1 day. When asked where he found it, Zeke brushed off the question. The explanation was too complicated, and he had no intention of sharing the details. Before Zeke had even finished his tea, Professor Fannin was already done tweaking the power source. The man was a true genius when it came to magic. Still, despite his composed demeanor, Zeke could tell the professor was suspicious. High-compression mana stones were rare and meticulously documented in ancient texts. Each one had a registration number to track its ownership and origin. A single check could reveal where it came from and who it currently belonged to. Yet, the mana stones in Zeke's possession were completely unregistered. No matter how thoroughly one searched, they wouldn't appear in the Central Continent's registration records. Professor Fannin's skepticism was justified. It was better than blind faith. His expertise and sharp judgment made him a truly exceptional figure. Zeke couldn't help but think that a man of such talent deserved more recognition than he was getting here. With the design finally complete, the professor activated the apparatus, bringing them back to Papner's breath. They handed the device over to Galleon, the master blacksmith of Soul and Halberd. Zeke and Fannin watched as the blacksmith got to work, his workshop glowing with the light of carefully arranged magic circles. The pure excitement on Galleon's face was contagious. He had finally been given the chance to craft weapons that met his own high standards. This was a moment of history in the making. After a successful demonstration, Professor Fannin excused himself to attend a lecture, leaving Zeke with Galleon. The blacksmith was overwhelmed with gratitude. He had long dreamed of completing a magic brazier, but never thought he would see it happen in his lifetime. Making a deal with Zeke was the best decision he had ever made. Now that Zeke had upheld his end, it was time for Galleon to do the same. Without hesitation, Zeke reached into his bag and pulled out an item. The moment Galleon laid eyes on it, he knew exactly what it was. Inside the lavish case rested a pristine dragon's fang. Among the many rewards of inheriting Terran's will, Bahamut's sharpest fang was undoubtedly the most valuable. The sight of it alone made the blacksmith tremble with excitement. Tears and snot ran down Galleon's face as he clutched the massive fang, leaving Zeke momentarily bewildered. First, he had helped bring the magic brazier to life, and now he was giving a humble craftsman the chance to forge a weapon from a dragon's fang. Overcome with emotion, Galleon swore to create a blade that would surpass Zeke's every expectation, even if it cost him his life. His words struck a chord. They were the same ones he had uttered in Zeke's previous life. Even in this second chance, Galleon remained the same passionate fool. That realization stirred something deep within Zeke. Leaving Papner's breath behind, he left the crafting to the master. With the greatest blacksmith on the continent working on his weapon, he had no doubt it was going to be something legendary. After leaving the forge, Zeke headed straight back to his room in the Platinum Mansion. He had gone through a lot just to secure a proper weapon, and now he could finally relax. It had been a week since his duel with Duke, and just as he was thinking about the note he received, inviting him for a rematch, trouble found him first. A familiar presence slipped into his room. Standing behind him was Duke Draker, and he did not look pleased. His eyes burned with fury as he demanded an explanation for why Zeke had ignored his invitation. The air grew heavy with bloodlust. Duke wasn't just angry. He was ready to kill. Amused, Zeke decided to toy with him. He casually insisted that he had no intention of challenging him again. That was all it took for Duke to snap. In an instant, he closed the distance and grabbed Zeke, his grip unyielding. Before Zeke could react, the crazed knight hurled him straight out of the open window. Caught off guard, Zeke felt himself plummeting. His room was on one of the higher floors. Falling from this height was no joke. If he hit the ground before his passive healing kicked in, he might not survive the impact. Instinctively, he reached for the edge of the balcony, but before he could grab hold, a strong hand caught him by the throat. Duke wasn't letting him go just yet. His grip tightened as he stared down at Zeke, furious. He refused to believe the young man didn't understand the meaning behind his letter. First, Zeke avoided him in the treatment room, and now this? It almost felt like he was doing it on purpose, deliberately getting under Duke's skin. With an impatient scowl, Duke gave him 5 seconds to stop messing around and start talking. But instead of panicking, Zeke simply smiled. He calmly pointed out that Duke was the one being dishonest, still pretending to be a gardener while demanding honesty from him. Something shifted in Duke's expression. He had been expecting fear, but there was none. As the countdown reached its end, the old knight's grip loosened, and a grin spread across his face. Without warning, Duke tossed Zeke back inside like a rag doll. He crashed onto the floor, wrecking half the room, but thanks to his sturdy body, he wasn't seriously hurt. Dusting himself off, Zeke looked up to see Duke. No, Garden Keeper Dexter, offering him a hand. With a smirk, the old knight finally admitted the truth. He wasn't just some eccentric gardener. He was once a Black Knight of Draker. Zeke feigned surprise, though he had already pieced together the truth long ago. Still, he threw himself into the act, offering an exaggerated apology for failing to recognize an esteemed member of the Draker family and a once honorable Black Knight. Duke narrowed his eyes, still suspicious. "Was this your plan all along?" he asked. Zeke, as shameless as ever, continued to play dumb, milking the moment for all it was worth. Taking advantage of the rare opportunity, he casually asked why Duke referred to himself as a former Black Knight. The old knight's expression darkened. "I simply no longer carry the title," he stated flatly, refusing to elaborate. It was common knowledge that knights could rise through the ranks, but Zeke hadn't known they could fall from them just as easily. Sensing that Duke had no intention of answering, Zeke let the matter drop. He did, however, notice the subtle tremor in the old man's hand. Perhaps there was more to this story than he initially thought. Since Duke had been honest enough to reveal his true identity, Zeke decided it was only fair to do the same. He knelt before the knight and confessed outright. He had known all along. In truth, he had been deliberately provoking Duke, hoping to be accepted as an apprentice. Rather than anger, Duke's reaction was unexpected. He actually smiled. Amused by Zeke's audacity, the Gale Knight finally made his decision. "Fine," he said. "You're officially my apprentice." Zeke was stunned. That's it? He had expected to go through trial after trial to prove himself. Yet here he was, securing a legendary mentor with nothing more than sheer persistence. Wasting no time, he bowed deeply, formally stating his intent. "I, Zeke Draker, swear to bring honor to my master's name, to obey his teachings, and to seek both wisdom and strength under his guidance." Duke raised an eyebrow. "Ah, you actually know the apprentice's vow." Most of the younger generation had forgotten such traditions. Zeke, however, firmly believed that culture and discipline were essential virtues of a knight. Still, there was one last thing he wanted to ask. "Master, if I may." Duke immediately frowned. "Don't call me that." Zeke smirked, but continued anyway. "Why did you accept me as your apprentice?" Duke was notorious for turning down students. Even Andre, the so-called genius of the century, had spent years begging before finally being taken in. Though Zeke had his suspicions, he wanted to hear it straight from Duke himself. The old knight chuckled. "Take a guess." Zeke grinned. "Because I'm the genius of the family?" Duke let out a loud laugh. "Confident, aren't you?" "But no. If I wanted raw talent, I would have chosen that girl from the Turin family." His expression shifted, turning serious. "I picked you for one reason, kid. Tenacity. Talent alone isn't enough to reach the level of a red knight, or even a black knight," Duke stated firmly. In fact, the truly gifted often crumble the moment they face real adversity. Their talent snuffed out before it ever reaches its full potential. Zeke couldn't agree more. He had lived an entire lifetime of struggle and hardship. Time and time again, he had watched so-called geniuses, those expected to become red knights, fall short of their potential. Most of them never made it past the rank of Blue Knight. Their progress stalled the moment they encountered true difficulty. With that, Duke ended their conversation and stood up. "Enough talk. Time for your first lesson." Zeke followed him to the empty western greenhouse, only to discover something unexpected, a hidden gymnasium beneath it. He hadn't even known this place existed. Duke didn't bother explaining. "Start running," he ordered. So Zeke ran. For 3 hours straight. He kept circling the track, all while Duke silently observed. Not a single word, not a single instruction, just his piercing gaze watching, evaluating. Zeke couldn't help but wonder what his master was trying to figure out. Then, finally, Duke called out, "Stop!" Zeke immediately halted, relieved to end the mindless jogging. But before he could catch his breath, Duke was already behind him. The old knight moved like a fanon, his hand darting towards Zeke's wrist. Instinct kicked in, Zeke twisted away, dodging the grab just in time. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to put distance between them. Duke narrowed his eyes, glancing at his own hand. Though he had failed to grab hold of Zeke, the brief contact had nearly ruined the young man's special glove. That only confirmed his suspicions. "You got a problem with pulse checking?" Duke asked, his voice sharp. Zeke knew better than to believe that was Duke's real intention. This sly old fox had been suspicious from the start, from their duel in the infirmary to the fight in the greenhouse, and now after watching him run for 500 laps. Not once had Duke sensed a single drop of aura from Zeke's body. And just now, the moment he reached for Zeke's wrist, the boy had instinctively pulled away. Duke wasn't going to beat around the bush anymore. His gaze locked onto Zeke, unwavering. "You can't use aura? Can you?" The question hit like a hammer. Zeke's breath caught in his throat. Duke had done his homework. He knew about the bronze statue. He had heard the uproar over the never-before-seen golden light Zeke had triggered. Now he was demanding the truth. "If I'm wrong," Duke said calmly, "then let me check your pulse." Zeke looked into his master's eyes. There was no malice there, no accusations, just raw curiosity. Aura was everything to a Draker. If word got out that a noble from their bloodline couldn't wield it, the scandal would be catastrophic. Yet, despite knowing the weight of such a revelation, Duke's focus wasn't on politics or reputation. Right now, he simply wanted to know the truth. Zeke was lucky that Duke was such an eccentric old bastard. If it were anyone else, this situation could have turned ugly. For now, his focus remained on one thing: getting his hands on Graham, his blade. Until then, he had to be extra careful not to draw suspicion about his aura. This was a wake-up call, and he couldn't afford to make any mistakes. But unlike his past life, where he was branded as the first failed awakener of the Draker bloodline, things were different now. There was no need for him to spin lies. Stealing his resolve, Zeke calmly removed his special gloves. The moment they came off, they revealed the symbol of a pure-blood awakener, undeniable proof of his noble lineage. Yet, despite awakening successfully, for reasons unknown, he simply could not use aura. He hoped that by sharing part of the truth, he could conceal the rest of his secrets. Lowering his gaze, he let out a shaky breath before apologizing. "If the family finds out I can't use aura, they'll cast me out," he murmured. His voice trembled, and then, like a true performer, tears welled up in his eyes. He looked every bit the helpless, terrified child. Someone give this man an award. Seeing his apprentice on the verge of tears, Duke's expression softened. At the end of the day, a child is still a child, he thought. No matter how composed Zeke tried to appear, he was still just a boy burdened with a fate too heavy for his age. Without another word, Zeke extended his wrist, offering his pulse for examination. Duke accepted and carefully spread his aura through the boy's body, scanning for any trace of aura circulation. Nothing. Not a single drop of aura could be found within Zeke, despite his successful awakening. Duke frowned. This should have been impossible. He racked his brain for an explanation, but no answer came. Meanwhile, Zeke remained calm. He had expected this reaction. The results of the blessing rite were absolute. Drakers always awakened aura. Even if Duke wanted to believe the truth, his mind would try to rationalize it, to find another explanation rather than accept the reality before him. And just as expected, Duke came to his own conclusion. "You're an irregular," he muttered. Zeke blinked, tilting his head. "Irregular?" Duke nodded. "People with anomalous abilities, ones that don't follow normal rules. Some irregulars can wield both aura and mana. Others have unnatural talents, like glimpses into the future. Because their existence challenges common sense, irregulars aren't treated kindly. If word gets out, it'll cause unnecessary trouble." He crossed his arms, his voice lowering. "It's best we keep this secret between master and apprentice." Zeke nodded in agreement, though he already had a solid grasp on how people without knowledge of classes would react to abnormalities like his. "As for your ability," Duke continued, glancing at him, "it must be your absurd stamina and recovery speed. Even minor internal injuries should take time to heal, yet you bounce back almost instantly." Zeke remained silent, letting Duke come to his own conclusions. If this explanation kept his real secret safe, then so be it. But that unshakable concept didn't seem to apply to Zeke. His recovery was unnatural. He could bounce back from severe injuries almost instantly. Duke pondered for a moment before forming a hypothesis. "If your stamina and regeneration are that fast, then you must be burning an absurd amount of energy," he said. "And that energy is aura." Zeke raised an eyebrow. The old knight continued. "Your aura is constantly being drained to fuel your body's recovery. That's why there's barely any left to sense or use." Zeke was impressed. For an eccentric old man, Duke had come up with a surprisingly plausible explanation. Keeping up his act, he furrowed his brows and asked hesitantly, "Does that mean I'll never be able to use aura?" Duke just laughed. "That's what you're worried about." He shook his head. "Forget aura. My Gale, arts don't need it at all." Zeke listened intently as Duke explained. A special art is a technique developed by a knight who has reached their peak. Normally, these arts are extensions of dragon-slaying arts and require aura to function. But Gale arts? That was different. It focused entirely on physical mastery. Watch closely, Duke said. Before Zeke could blink, the ground beneath Duke shattered. With a single leap, the old knight launched himself across the gymnasium. His speed was insane. He tore through the air, faster than the eye could follow, his movements so fluid that even afterimages were invisible. In a matter of seconds, he had crisscrossed the arena multiple times before landing casually back in his original spot, without breaking a sweat. Duke turned to Zeke. Well, did you catch that? Zeke exhaled. Would it be alright if I tried it myself? Duke blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Most people would need to see it again, but this kid? He was already itching to attempt it. The old knight let out a hearty laugh. Bold one, aren't you? Fine, go ahead. Zeke stepped up. He replayed Duke's movements in his mind, visualizing every step, every shift in weight, every explosion of force. Then he moved. His first step landed directly on top of Duke's footprint, leaving a crater in its wake. And just like that, he was gone. Zeke perfectly traced his master's movement pattern, following the prints of each step without error. And now that he was experiencing the technique himself, something clicked. These weren't just random steps. Every movement had a purpose. Some were for attacking, others for dodging. Some for closing distance, others for creating it. With the final step completed, Zeke slowed himself down, coming to a steady halt. Duke was speechless. He already knew the kid was gifted. But this was beyond anything he had expected. Just a week ago, Zeke was nowhere near this level. The improvement was staggering, like night and day. Duke had never seen such rapid progress before, let alone in someone with Zeke's natural potential. But, of course, Zeke had to go and spoil it with his arrogance. If only he could rein that in, he'd be flawless. Duke pulled him into a playful headlock, teasing him about going from bawling his eyes out to perfectly executing such a difficult technique. Time had passed since their training began, and today, Zeke was at the Academy's dining hall, piling his plate with every kind of food he could get: meat, seafood, bread, anything he could grab. Ever since becoming the Gale Knight's apprentice a month ago, his training had pushed his appetite through the roof. As he ate, Instructor Andre approached, asking for a moment to talk. With a packed schedule, Zeke told him to just say whatever he needed to right then and there. Andre had only one question. How did Zeke manage to convince Sir Dexter to take him in? Zeke, still focused on his meal, answered casually. He didn't do anything special. Sir Dexter chose him on his own. Andre's expression darkened, irritation flashing across his face. It was clear he didn't like that answer. His resentment was obvious, and in his mind, there was only one explanation. Zeke was chosen simply because he was a pure-blood awakener. That assumption didn't sit well with Zeke. He finished eating, then turned the conversation right back on Andre, delivering a sharp reality check. He called out Andre's deep-seated inferiority complex, a truth the instructor wasn't ready to hear. Andre's hands shook with anger as he tried to put Zeke in his place, calling him a mere cadet. But Zeke wasn't done talking yet. He challenged Andre's claim, asking if he truly believed that a man like Sir Dexter would choose a disciple for such a shallow reason. If his bloodline alone was enough to earn him a place, then wasn't that proof of his own strength? The fact that he could use his lineage as a foundation to rise to this position only reinforced his worth. Zeke didn't stop there. He gave Andre some blunt but valuable advice. Rather than feeding his ego and clinging to his inferiority complex, maybe he should actually put in the effort to be chosen. As much as it stung, Andre couldn't deny that there was truth to Zeke's words. Later that day, at the Western Greenhouse Arena, the usual two-person training session had an unexpected guest. Someone had arrived before Zeke and Duke, sprinting around the track like his life depended on it. Confused, Zeke turned to his master for an explanation, but Duke was just as baffled. Turns out, Instructor Andre had shown up earlier, practically begging to be allowed to train under Duke, even if it meant starting as nothing more than a servant. Amused, Duke gave him a challenge. If he could run 300 laps without using aura, he'd consider it. And now, here Andre was pushing himself to the limit. Duke couldn't hide his surprise at Andre's sudden determination, and even Zeke had to admit it was impressive. This guy wasn't just some arrogant scholar after all. He actually had grit. That same day, a major event was unfolding at the academy. Every student had been summoned to the training grounds for an important occasion, the Patriarch's visit. The sound of thundering hooves echoed outside the campus as a grand carriage, bearing the insignia of the Draker family, rolled through the gates. The academy's dean, Howard Draker, a rather rotund man, was quick to act. He ordered his men to prepare for their supreme leader's arrival, making sure to position himself front and center to be the first to greet him. As the carriage came to a stop, the door opened, and Howard immediately bowed deeply, his pudgy face full of reverence. Behind him, the knights followed suit, kneeling in formation and raising their blades in salute. The Patriarch had arrived, right on time, exactly at noon. The academy's bell tolled, its ringing sharper and louder than usual, marking this rare occasion. Then, he stepped forward, Arthur Draker, leader of the third Transcendent Household, the Dragon Slayer. His very presence radiated authority, demanding obedience without a single word. He placed a firm hand on Howard's shoulder, towering over the dean as he offered a rare word of praise for his hard work. A true force of nature, Arthur was the definition of power and dominance. Howard, still bowing, hurriedly suggested they head inside, citing the harsh midday sun. But Arthur Draker was a man who moved at his own pace. Meanwhile, some students near the gates managed to catch a glimpse of him, their eyes widening in awe. Then, at last, he stepped fully into view, revealing his face to the gathered crowd. Standing before the young dragon slayers, Arthur addressed them directly. They were the future of his clan, its hope and its strength. He urged them to train harder, to push their limits, for their own growth, and for the glory of the Draker family. Inspired by Arthur's commanding presence and powerful words, the students took his speech to heart, shouting their responses with full conviction. As the sun blazed overhead, Arthur turned away, ordering Howard to escort him inside. Behind closed doors, Zeke was summoned to meet the leader of all knights, the guardian of the Dragon Slayer name, his father. Arthur chuckled at Zeke's formal, almost outdated greeting, a rare thing to hear these days. With a small smile, he poured 2 cups of tea and gestured for his son to sit. He had heard that Zeke liked tea, so he had prepared something rare, hoping it would suit his taste. To an outsider, it might have seemed like a thoughtful gesture from a caring father, but Zeke saw it for what it really was, proof that every little detail about him, even his personal preferences, was being reported back to the higher-ups. There was an old saying, there may be things the Emperor doesn't know, but nothing escapes the eyes of a Draker. Right now, Zeke could feel the weight of that truth. Arthur wasted no time getting to the point. He had called Zeke here after hearing that Duke had taken him as a disciple. True to his nature, the Patriarch didn't care for small talk. Zeke, however, downplayed the situation, saying that Duke was simply doing him a favor. Arthur wasn't entirely sure what his son's ultimate goal was, but he admitted that following Duke's guidance would certainly lead to a bright future. But before he could say more, Zeke cut in. His goal wasn't just to learn from Duke. His goal was to become the strongest man on the continent. Arthur's eyes sharpened at the declaration. Zeke wasn't finished. He vowed to surpass everyone, to become so powerful that he could live without restraint. That was his ambition, and he would stop at nothing to achieve it. Arthur studied his son carefully, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he deliberately let his aura slip, just enough to make a point. The air grew heavy. Zeke's body tensed as an invisible pressure surrounded him. A chill ran down his spine. This was no ordinary aura. This was the Astral Sword, said to grant dominion over all living beings within its range. It was the pinnacle of aura manipulation, something only the most elite Black Knights could wield. The sheer presence of it made Zeke's breath hitch. Arthur's eyes gleamed with something unreadable, perhaps amusement, perhaps challenge. Zeke realized he had spoken too boldly, too carelessly. But even under the suffocating weight of his father's power, he refused to back down. Gritting his teeth, he stood his ground. He didn't take back his words. He didn't retreat. Instead, he doubled down, looking Arthur in the eye. Yes, his goal was to surpass even his own father. And no matter what it took, he would make it happen. Arthur studied Zeke for a moment, then, seemingly satisfied, withdrew his astral sword. The suffocating pressure in the room instantly lifted as he calmly sipped his tea. He admitted that Zeke's declaration was the most interesting thing he had heard in years. Originally, Arthur had come here to support both the Academy and his youngest son, but after seeing Zeke's growth firsthand, he wondered if that would be enough. Reaching into his finely tailored suit, he pulled out something small and slid it across the table. Zeke's eyes flicked to the object, a black card, emblazoned with the Draker family insignia. For a moment, he was stunned. He had always believed that black knights like Duke were the pinnacle of strength, but his father, he was on a completely different level. Seeing the black card in person made Zeke uneasy. He stumbled over his words, and Arthur smirked. He could tell his son already understood its significance. This wasn't just any card. It was the card, a symbol of absolute privilege. Only a select few were ever granted one. And with it came near limitless benefits. No credit limit, unrestricted access to elite establishments, and influence beyond measure. It was, in short, an infinite money glitch. Arthur casually explained that the card would be under both their names, meaning Zeke could use it freely. But Zeke wasn't foolish. He knew the real reason behind this gift. Every transaction made with a black card left a record. It was just another way to keep tabs on him. Still, the fact that Arthur had chosen this method, rather than assigning a black martial squad to shadow him, meant one thing. The Patriarch didn't see him as a threat. Not yet. Zeke forced down his unease and accepted the card, vowing to use it only when necessary. Arthur dismissed him with a final word of encouragement. If Zeke truly wanted to become the strongest, then he had better put in the work. Zeke bowed one last time, thanking the master of the Draker family, then walked out, his mind swirling with thoughts. As the door shut behind him, Arthur leaned back, closing his eyes in contemplation. His youngest son's ambition was unexpected but intriguing. Then, the silence was shattered. Duke strode into the room, not bothering with formalities. His voice was sharp, his expression unreadable. "You're a sickening old man?" Arthur opened one eye, unfazed. "Why so angry?" Duke crossed his arms, his tone dripping with disdain. "So now you're suddenly playing father? After a lifetime of neglect?" Arthur didn't flinch. But for the first time in years, someone had dared to call him out on his bullshit. And Duke was just about the only man with the strength and the nerve to do it. Arthur let out a sigh, insisting that he had no choice. This was the price of being the head of the household. The responsibilities of leadership demanded sacrifice. Besides, Duke's accusations were practically slander against the Patriarch himself. Duke wasn't having any of it. He sank into the couch, stretching out as he met Arthur's gaze. "Then go ahead, cuff me and take me away," he challenged. Arthur chuckled, dropping all pretense. Out of everyone on the continent, Duke was the only one he could speak to freely. Reaching into his suit once more, Arthur pulled out something far more valuable than gold. A bottle of Dragon's Breath, a rare and prized liquor. He offered Duke a drink to go with their conversation, and instantly, Duke's mood shifted. He smirked, admitting that, if nothing else, Arthur had damn good taste when it came to alcohol. With drinks poured, Arthur finally addressed the real issue, the strange tension looming over the continent. Duke feigned ignorance, claiming he had been keeping to himself at the Academy. But Arthur knew better. Duke had eyes and ears everywhere. Duke sighed, setting his glass down. "Why ask something you already know the answer to?" Arthur didn't argue. He simply waited. After a moment, Duke leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "The Emperor's gone mad with his obsession for immortality. He's scouring the entire continent for anything that might give him even the faintest clue." Arthur nodded, unsurprised. He shared the same opinion. While magic could slow aging, true immortality was a myth, something no one had ever achieved and likely never would. However, there was one thing that worried him. The Emperor wasn't just chasing a dream. He was hunting for something real, something connected to the Elder Dragon. That possibility changed everything. Unbeknownst to them, Zeke had been listening from the next room, casually leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets. Using soul manifestation, he absorbed every word, refining his aura in the process. This conversation was gold. Arthur speculated that the Emperor's search had likely led him to a relic tied to the Elder Dragon. Duke thought it over and found the theory plausible. Then came the bigger question: was it possible that the Emperor had already found it? Arthur considered the thought, swirling his drink. It wasn't impossible. His personal squad, the Order of Black Knights, had been gathering intelligence, and all signs pointed to one location: the northern continent. Duke's eyes sharpened. That caught his attention. The fact that he was only hearing about this now meant that the Empire's spies hadn't gotten their hands on the information yet. But they would. It was only a matter of time. This entire crusade for immortality dragged up old memories for Duke. He recalled the past, the moment that insane emperor took the throne. He started a war to unify the continent. It was only after conquering half of the central lands that he finally stopped the bloodshed. And now, history seemed ready to repeat itself. Back then, Duke had assumed the emperor would eventually abandon his ridiculous, decaying dream. But he had been dead wrong. If that lunatic actually got his hands on an artifact capable of granting immortality, the entire continent would be plunged into a war unlike anything seen before, a conflict so massive it would leave only fire and ruin in its wake. Arthur Draker wasn't about to sit back and let that happen. Given the severity of the situation, he had already made his decision. He would go north and handle it himself. That declaration stunned Duke. Arthur leaving his seat in the central continent? That was a disaster waiting to happen. If the Patriarch wasn't around to keep the Emperor in check, that power-hungry bastard would tear through everything unchecked. But that was exactly why Arthur had come here today. Aside from giving a half-hearted speech to the trainees, he was here to clue Duke in on his plans. And he knew Duke well enough to predict his reaction. Resistance was futile. Realizing he had no other choice, Duke let out a long sigh. With a reluctant smirk, he raised his glass for a toast. Fine, but don't expect me to play nice while you're gone. Arthur chuckled. He never did. The grumpy old guardian of the academy groaned in frustration. But Arthur knew, no matter how much he complained, Duke was more than capable of holding down the fort. Meanwhile, in the next room, Zeke was paying the price for his eavesdropping. His entire body ached. His vision blurred. He had been using soul manifestation for too long, and now the backlash was hitting hard. His knees buckled, and before he knew it, he was on the floor, his breath ragged, his eyes bloodshot. Even after absorbing the heart of Bahamut, the side effects of this technique were impossible to avoid. But it was worth it, because what he had just learned was invaluable. Everything was starting to fall into place. The statue he had gotten his hands on before his regression, it wasn't just some relic. It was the Elder Dragon's artifact. From the mysterious voice he had heard before taking his last breath, to the strange system messages when he woke up in his younger body, it all made a little more sense now. Without even realizing it, his past self had stolen the very artifact the Emperor was obsessed with. No wonder he had been hunted like a dog. That crazed dictator had mobilized his most elite unit, the hunting dogs, and sent them after him, chasing him to the ends of the world. Back then, Zeke had been too consumed by revenge to question why he was being pursued so relentlessly. He had been so focused on his enemies that he never stopped to consider the real reason behind it all. But now he had a concrete clue about his regression. The administrator system that had sent him back in time. It was tied to the Elder Dragon's artifact, which only led to more questions. Who could create such an artifact? Just how powerful were they? And most importantly, why? Sitting on the floor, Zeke took a deep, steadying breath. He had chased after answers, only to find even bigger mysteries waiting for him. With their drinks finished and business settled, the top dogs of the Draker family parted ways. Duke assured Arthur that he would move soon, and Arthur, in turn, entrusted him to get things done. But just as he was about to leave, Arthur suddenly stopped. The air in the hallway shifted. His sharp gaze locked onto the closed door of the room where Zeke was hiding. as if he could see straight through it. Inside, completely unaware of the impending danger, Zeke was still deep in thought, unraveling the mysteries of immortality and time travel. If he really had stolen the Emperor's artifact, then what exactly made them believe it had anything to do with eternal life? Then, heavy footsteps. The sound sent every alarm in Zeke's body screaming. Arthur was getting too close. In an instant, the door swung open, Arthur's sharp, unreadable gaze scanning the room. But it was empty. Zeke had reacted just in time. By the time Arthur stepped inside, his son was already slipping out the window, narrowly avoiding being caught. Letting his guard down, Arthur dismissed the odd feeling, leaving the room behind. Later that day, Zeke was back at the Western Greenhouse Arena, locked in his usual grueling training routine. It was supposed to be a no-interruptions kind of day, but old Decker, ever the diligent servant, ignored that rule. Bowing apologetically, he explained that a fellow student had come looking for him. Zeke furrowed his brows. Who the hell would go out of their way to visit him? He didn't have friends in the academy. Curiosity got the best of him, and he allowed Decker to let them in. He wasn't expecting Liam Stone. The moment the bulky student entered, he bowed his head in complete submission. Zeke narrowed his eyes, skeptical. What's this guy's deal? Then, in an earnest voice, Liam pleaded to be taken in. Zeke exhaled sharply, already regretting not ignoring this guy when he was humbling his so-called boss. Are you saying you want to be my subordinate? He asked, annoyed. Liam dropped his head even lower, his voice unwavering as he swore his allegiance to Zeke. Now this was unexpected. Zeke raised an eyebrow. What happened to your loyalty to Jakin? At the mention of that name, Liam's expression darkened. A flicker of anger passed over his face before he spat out his answer. He'd been abandoned. Without a powerful Draker backing him, he had no hope of entering Valhalla as a trainee. Zeke's mind flashed back to his past life. Liam was the same back then. He had never found out why this guy was so obsessed with Valhalla, but one thing was clear. He would beg, grovel, and do whatever it took to get in. Clicking his tongue, Zeke gave him a flat-out rejection. You're an idiot, he scoffed. If you're so desperate, go try Turin or Simmons instead. Waving him off, Zeke emphasized one last thing. He wasn't some support system for people to cling to. And most importantly, even he couldn't help Liam enter Valhalla. Zeke had no reason to trust a word out of Liam's mouth. For all he knew, this brute could be a spy sent by Jakin, plotting revenge. The doubt in Zeke's voice was obvious, and Liam didn't try to argue. Instead, he acted. In one swift motion, he pulled a knife from his waistband. Zeke's eyes narrowed, prepared for an attack, but Liam didn't charge at him. Instead, the fool turned the blade on himself. With a brutal, unflinching slash, he cut off his own left ear. Blood splattered onto the arena floor. Zeke remained silent, watching as Liam dropped his severed ear on the ground like it was nothing. Liam took a shaky breath, his expression unwavering. I get it, he admitted. You have every reason to doubt me. But I'll do whatever it takes to prove myself to you. Then, with frightening sincerity, he took it a step further. If you want me mute, I'll cut out my tongue. If you want me crippled, I'll take off my own foot. Zeke couldn't deny it. This was an extreme, borderline psychotic display of loyalty. Liam wasn't bluffing. The sheer desperation in his voice, the blood dripping down his face, it wasn't an act. Watching him tremble, gritting his teeth through the pain, Zeke's mind flashed back to another moment. Another severed ear. It wasn't a memory he enjoyed. Not at all. Yet, as he looked at Liam, pushing himself to the absolute limit, all for a chance to follow him, he couldn't help but remember a time when he was in the same position. A battle-worn, scarred veteran with hate-filled eyes, kneeling before his past life master, begging to be made stronger than anyone. Liam's voice shook as he pleaded over and over again, desperate for Zeke to accept him. Zeke finally moved. Without a word, he tossed a training sword at Liam's feet. If you can withstand one strike from me, Zeke declared, I'll take you in. Liam's body swayed from the blood loss, but his face lit up. Hope! Even in his delirious state, he grinned through the pain. Thank you, he rasped, barely standing. Zeke wasn't heartless. He gave the idiot some time to get his wound treated before their match. Liam clutched the training sword, his mind racing. He thought it would be easy. After all, he possessed Draker Aura too, even if only to a certain extent. But then, he looked up at Zeke's stance, at his presence, and suddenly, it felt like he wasn't staring at a fellow student anymore. It felt like he was staring into the eyes of a monster. For the first time, Liam wondered if they could even be considered peers. Before Zeke even moved, Liam could already feel the crushing weight of his aura. His chest tightened, his breath came in ragged gasps, and his vision blurred. The sheer pressure made it difficult to even grip his sword. Then, Zeke struck. His speed was explosive, his compact muscles coiling like springs before unleashing overwhelming force. Liam, moving purely on instinct, raised his blade to meet the attack. He swung down, trying to parry the thrust, and their training swords clashed, sparks flying from the impact. A heartbeat later, one of the swords was sent spiraling through the air. It was over. As expected, Liam was completely outmatched, his weapon knocked clean from his grasp. If this had been a real fight, he'd already be dead. Zeke exhaled, disappointment evident in his tone. "Is this really all you've got?" he asked, looking down at Liam, who had collapsed flat on the ground. Even Zeke felt a twinge of pity at the sorry sight. Still, he could see the stubborn determination in the big guy's eyes. With a sigh, he gave his advice. Forget Valhalla. Find another path. But Liam wasn't willing to give up. He knew the truth. After Zeke had humiliated that spoiled brat, Jane, he had been cast aside without hesitation. Liam came from a distant branch of the family, so if he wasn't Jane's attendant, he never would have even stepped foot in the cradle. And if this academy was willing to expel Zeke, a direct Draker descendant, they wouldn't hesitate to discard someone like him. Zeke turned to walk away, thinking the matter was settled, until he felt something heavy latch onto his leg. He looked down to see Liam clinging to him for dear life. Why was this guy so desperate? In the previous timeline, Liam had been expelled from the academy, and the order he served had crumbled. But through sheer will and experience, he clawed his way up, eventually rising to the rank of a Red Knight, earning the title of the Mercenary King. Now, with tears streaming down his face, Liam begged for another chance to prove himself. Zeke narrowed his eyes, patience wearing thin. This guy was seriously stubborn. "Fine, you get one last chance," he said. "Don't waste it." Zeke agreed to take Liam under his wing, but only on one condition. Liam had claimed he'd do anything, that he'd cut out his own tongue if Zeke wanted a mute, that he'd sever his own feet if that's what it took. So, Zeke gave him a task that was nearly impossible. Gripping Liam's shoulder, he spoke grimly. "Cut off your right arm." The word sent a chill down Liam's spine. Zeke didn't let up. "So, what's more important, that arm or serving under me?" He knew exactly what he was asking. He was telling Liam to throw away any hope of becoming a swordsman. Any sane person would back out. With that, Zeke turned away, assuming his training stance, expecting Liam to finally give up and leave. But instead of heading for the door, Liam walked toward a sword. Zeke's eyes narrowed. He had assumed this wasn't a big deal. Liam getting expelled wouldn't change the future. He'd still rise to become a Red Knight, a legend in his own right. But the way Liam moved, something felt off. Then it hit him. Liam wasn't giving up. He was actually going to do it. His grip tightened around the blade. He raised it high, aiming for his own arm. Zeke's body moved before his mind could catch up. Pushing his legs to their limit, he closed the distance in an instant. Just before Liam could bring the blade down, Zeke's sword flashed, cleaving Liam's weapon in half. The clang of metal echoed across the arena. Liam stared at his intact arm, his expression blank, as if he couldn't comprehend why it was still there. Zeke, on the other hand, was furious. Grabbing Liam by the collar, he hoisted the big fool off the ground. "Have you completely lost your goddamn mind?" he barked. Sure, the condition was extreme, but it wasn't set in stone. What if Zeke had been the kind of bastard who went back on his word? Liam would have thrown everything away for nothing. But Liam wasn't hesitating because of the condition itself. He was willing to go that far because, to him, there was something even more important than his own arm. Zeke dropped Liam back onto his feet, and fixed him with a cold stare. Do something that's stupid again, and you're out. I don't care how loyal you are. Keep that in mind. The constant tension on Liam's face finally eased. Zeke's words might have been harsh, but they confirmed one thing: he was staying. Still, there was one more issue to deal with. We need to get you to the infirmary, Zeke added. Can't have my subordinate walking around looking like a one-eared freak. After getting his ear patched up, Liam was invited to Zeke's personal banquet hall for a meal. As he sat there, he absent-mindedly touched his newly restored ear, still amazed by how quickly it had been fixed. Turns out, Zeke had used one of his healing potions to regenerate it. Liam felt guilty. It was a rare and valuable potion, and his new lord had wasted it on him right from the start. But Zeke simply waved it off. Consider it an investment, he said. Nothing more. Now that things had calmed down, Zeke finally addressed the real issue. What could possibly be more important to you than your own arm? Liam's answer was short, simple, and made perfect sense. His mother. After being cast aside by Jane, he received news that his mother had suddenly collapsed with an unnaturally high fever. Though she recovered, that was only the beginning. Strange, rose-like patterns began to spread across her body, draining her strength by the day. Zeke's expression darkened. The symptoms sounded eerily familiar. Liam had taken desperate measures because there was no other choice. The village healers had no idea what the disease was, let alone how to cure it. The only hope he could cling to was Valhalla. Students of the academy and their families had access to the best medical treatment on the continent. If he got in, his mother might have a chance. Zeke let out a long sigh. Now he understood. Without another word, he picked up a pen and dipped it into his inkwell, scribbling down the symptoms as Liam had described them. Red, rose-like markings, recurring high fevers. He knew this disease all too well. In 5 years, the entire central continent would be ravaged by the Rose Plague, a highly contagious illness with a staggering death toll. Countless lives would be lost before a radical treatment was discovered, wiping it out completely. Finishing his notes, Zeke leaned back in his chair, his mind already at work. Zeke handed the piece of paper to Liam. Written on it was the formula for the medicine that could treat his mother's illness. The process wasn't complicated, and the ingredients weren't rare. Any village healer should be able to make it. Liam stared at the paper, confused but relieved. How was this possible? The village healers, experts who had spent their lives studying medicine, were completely stumped. Yet a young swordsman had casually produced the cure in mere seconds. In the future, the genius alchemist brothers, Al and Jeff, would be the ones to develop this treatment, saving countless lives. But before their discovery could be shared freely, the Alchemist Association would monopolize it, selling it at outrageous prices and exploiting desperate people. Eventually, the brothers would expose the formula to the public, ensuring that even warriors like Zeke would come to know of it. Of course, Zeke couldn't exactly explain all of this to Liam. So, he simply said, "I know a good alchemist." With the cure now in his hands, Liam technically had no reason to join Valhalla or even serve Zeke. His biggest problem had been solved in an instant. Liam, however, didn't see it that way. He stood up from his seat, his expression firm. He was a man of his word, and he had vowed to dedicate his life to serving Zeke. Clenching his fist, he took a knee and swore lifelong loyalty to the young lord. Zeke had spent the entire day trying to push this big fool away. But hearing the future mercenary king pledge his allegiance, that was reassuring in a way. Accepting the oath, Zeke gave one final warning. "Don't fall behind, or I'll leave you behind." Meanwhile, inside Dean Howard Draker's office, an unexpected conversation was taking place. Cadet Owen Zimmons had come to speak with the rotund dean about an important matter. Owen had a proposal, one that caught Howard completely off guard. "We should increase the difficulty of this semester's exams," Owen suggested. The dean raised an eyebrow. It wasn't every day that a cadet asked for something like this. Owen quickly apologized if he sounded arrogant, but explained his reasoning. This year's first years are unusually strong. Many of the great families have sent candidates, and on top of that, we have 2 pure-blood awakeners. If the exam remains at last year's difficulty, it won't properly test their abilities. Howard mulled it over. The kid had a point. After a brief silence, the dean gave a small nod, acknowledging the logic behind Owen's request. With a respectful bow, Owen excused himself and left the office. Howard leaned back in his chair, gazing out the window and thought. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, he muttered to himself. Owen Zimmons was already thinking several steps ahead, just like his father. He was identifying future issues and handling them before they even became problems. A few days later, the semester exam for dungeon exploration had arrived. All the first-year cadets gathered outside the ruins, ready to begin. The semestral evaluation at Draker Academy was a unique test, pairing students together and challenging them to escape a dungeon within a set time limit. Each duo was assigned a dungeon at random, with varying levels of difficulty. Naturally, Zeke and Liam were paired up. Even though they were packed and ready, Liam couldn't shake his nerves. Zeke, noticing this, reassured him. It's normal to be nervous. Just don't let it control you. Too much anxiety leads to mistakes, but getting too relaxed makes you careless. Stay sharp. Around them, some students chatted excitedly, while others waited in tense silence. Suddenly, a guard called out, Zeke Draker and Liam Stone. Without hesitation, the two stepped forward, heading toward the nearest ruined entrance. But just before they could enter, a black-gloved figure blocked their way. Wait, the man ordered. An armed academy guard then pointed toward a different door, one on the far side of the room. You've been assigned to that dungeon, he insisted. Zeke's eyes flickered toward the guard, instantly sensing something was off. The man's expression remained firm, almost too forceful, as if he was trying to mask something. Zeke sighed. Whatever setup this was, he was confident he could handle it. Let's go, he muttered, leading Liam toward the designated door, one that practically reeked of a trap. Despite the varying dungeon difficulties, these ruins were specialized for the Academy's exams, meaning they were still under the Draker's supervision. The main objective was simply to escape within the time limit, not to fight to the death. Each group was given 96 hours. That was the real enemy time, while combat skills were graded, and students could earn extra points by bringing back monster heads. None of that mattered if they didn't make it out before time ran out. Failing to escape meant an automatic failing grade. Inside the dungeon, the first part of their journey was surprisingly uneventful. No ambushes, no sudden threats, just a long trek through ancient ruins. After some time, they finally stopped to rest. With their bellies full and nothing pressing at the moment, it was the perfect time to catch some sleep. Oddly enough, despite being the subordinate, Liam urged Zeke to rest first. After all, the young lord had handled everything, setting up camp, preparing their meal. It was only fair that he got some rest. Zeke assured Liam that there was nothing to worry about. With his current constitution, he could go 4 days without sleep and still be fine. Seriously, I could stay up the whole exam, he added a bit too shamelessly. Liam knew better than to argue. With a reluctant grunt, he hauled his massive frame into the tent and finally got some rest. Now alone, Zeke sat by the bonfire, lost in thought. It had been 16 hours since they entered the dungeon. On top of that, he'd been training nonstop for 3 days before the exam. That meant he had been awake for nearly 90 hours. His infinite stamina kept his body going, but it did nothing for his mental exhaustion. And in a dungeon, where danger could emerge from any shadow, losing focus even for a second could be fatal. The eerie silence of the dungeon stretched on, the slow crawl of the night gnawing at his mind. He could feel the fatigue creeping in, clouding his thoughts. He wanted to wake Liam up and switch out, but then he made the worst possible mistake. He dozed off. His dreams dragged him back to the icy plains of the northern regions, a land where the Emperor's crimson flag was a symbol of cruelty and bloodshed. A woman's corpse lay before him, her lifeblood seeping into the snow. The red stains spread across the white landscape, a horrifying contrast that burned itself into his memory. Zeke's eyes snapped open. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body damp with sweat. For a moment, he sat frozen, half expecting to see the nightmare bleeding into reality. But no, the fire was still crackling, and the dungeon remained silent. It was just a dream. Still, he would rather face a horde of monsters than relive that memory again. Then, something caught his attention. A sound. One of his bell traps had been triggered. Zeke's senses sharpened instantly. He wasn't alone. He grabbed his water canister and quickly doused the bonfire, plunging the area into darkness. Then he barked a command. "Liam, wake the hell up!" As Liam stirred inside the tent, Zeke pressed his back against the wall near the disturbance, carefully assessing the situation. Using his dragon eyes would be too much of a risk during a 4-day exam. For now, he needed to let his natural vision adjust to the dark. Then, a scent drifted toward him. A pungent, acrid stench. Sulfur. Zeke's mind immediately connected the dots. There was only one creature he knew that reeked of sulfur. A monster that hunted in packs, ranked at danger level 3. A hellhound. In his past life, during this exact semester exam, the top cadet, Reyna, had hunted an orc. Zeke had never once heard of a dungeon room containing hellhounds. Something was off. He remained still, waiting for the expected grand entrance of the monstrous beast. But it never came. Instead, he noticed something even stranger. An alpha hellhound should weigh several hundred kilograms at most. Yet, judging by the deep, rumbling echoes bouncing off the cavern walls, whatever was approaching weighed several tons. A mutant, maybe? Using his blade as a mirror, Zeke carefully angled it around the corner, holding his breath. His quick thinking saved him, just in time to spot the incoming freight train of a monster barreling straight toward them. With sheer, brute force, the beast crashed through the door and walls like Papnir. The shockwave sent Zeke flying, but he twisted midair, landing perfectly on his feet. Liam rushed to his side, eyes wide in panic. Zeke, however, had a different reaction. He cursed under his breath. The Zimmons. In that brief moment before impact, he had spotted something, a trinket tucked into the Academy Guard's uniform. A distinct symbol tied to the Zimmons family. So that's how it is? He had expected underhanded tactics, but this was beyond dirty. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a fight to uncover his enemy's schemes. The true threat. The hellhound he had anticipated was already dead. Its head had been cleanly severed, its lifeless eyes staring blankly. And the one responsible? A hulking, green-skinned figure with a white beard, its thick muscles rippling with rage. A violent brute. A troll. Zeke's eyes narrowed. They hadn't sent hellhounds. They had skipped straight to using trolls as assassins. Liam, on the other hand, was frozen in sheer terror. Trolls were rank 1 monsters, beasts so powerful that hellhounds and orcs were nothing more than snacks to them. Their blood was a prized ingredient in healing medicines due to their absurd regenerative abilities. Liam finally snapped out of his daze. Gritting his teeth, he stepped forward, sword in hand, standing between Zeke and the monster. "I'll hold it off," he declared. "You need to get out of here." Zeke let out a short, amused breath. This idiot. Without a word, he reached out and lightly tapped Liam aside. "Don't ever say something so pathetic again." Zeke's gaze locked onto the approaching troll, sharp and unwavering. "Besides, I'm not the kind of lord who abandons his subordinates when it matters most." Then, dropping one last piece of advice, he added, "Don't believe in me. Believe in your own strength." Because Liam wasn't weak. Not at all. As a test, Zeke decided to take a back seat in this fight, letting Liam handle things on his own. The moment he stepped aside, Liam's tension eased. It was as if a massive weight had just been lifted off his shoulders. With renewed confidence, he locked onto the troll and nodded at Zeke in thanks. Moving in perfect sync, the duo rushed in from opposite angles, forcing the troll into a vulnerable position. The oversized brute stood there, clueless, as they sliced into it from both sides. Zeke had been deliberately holding back, matching Liam's tempo, and what he saw impressed him. Liam was already managing to land clean hits despite the troll's absurdly tough skin. Even more remarkable, he was targeting the joints. That meant he had studied monster anatomy in his spare time. A smart, diligent warrior. Zeke couldn't ask for a better underling. That said, Liam still had a long way to go. One of his shortcomings nearly cost him his life. The troll's massive, spiked club came swinging down, ready to turn Liam into paste. Zeke instantly shifted gears. In a flash, he closed the distance, effortlessly parrying the incoming strike. Without even sparing a glance, he sliced the troll's weapon clean in half. Liam stumbled back, shaken but unharmed. "Sorry, my lord. I should have handled that better." Zeke shook his head. "No need to apologize. You did well for your first real life-or-death battle." The troll, now weaponless, roared in blind fury. Its muscles bulged as it raised its massive arms, ready to fight barehanded. Before Liam could get himself into another close call, Zeke took control of the situation. "All right," he said, raising his blade. "Time to wrap this up." Then, in a whirlwind of blinding speed, he tore through the troll with a relentless flurry of attacks. The beast barely had time to register what was happening before it collapsed, a bloodied, mangled mess. Slaying the troll rewarded Zeke with 30 karma points, a hefty sum. Aside from that, this kill would surely net them a good chunk of extra points for the exam. With the battle over, Liam got to work dismantling the corpse, collecting whatever loot he could salvage. Meanwhile, Zeke turned his attention to a new system prompt. Sudden quest. Hunt 100 monsters of 10 different species within 72 hours. Reward, double karma points for every kill plus 2 random boxes. Zeke smirked. Things were about to get interesting. The word double flashed on the system prompt, and Zeke's eyes gleamed with greed. 79 hours remained until the exam ended. Killing 100 monsters in that time? Easy. The real problem was finding 10 different species. Most dungeon exams only contained 4 species at most. However, considering how the Zimmons had clearly rigged this place, it was likely they had stuffed it with high-class monsters to make sure he wouldn't leave alive. That worked in his favor. Juggling this urgent quest alongside escaping and scoring well on the exam was a lot, but nothing Zeke couldn't handle. By the time Liam finished dismantling the troll's corpse, their loot bag was starting to fill up. Each team had been provided with head collection bags for proof of kills. It wasn't as convenient as a subspace pocket, but it got the job done. With their first enemy down, it was time to move deeper. The hunt begins. Time ticked away quickly. A pack of burning wolves? Wiped out. 56 hours left. A nest of goblins. Easily farmed. The kill count skyrocketed. Their loot bag grew heavier. 39 hours remained. A giant bat, a tricky opponent with devastating sonic attacks, defeated. Their routine for the past 2 days had been simple. Kill. Camp. Rest. Repeat. By the final day, they had taken down plenty of monsters, securing a strong score for the exam. Sitting near the campfire, Zeke turned to Liam. "So, how's real combat treating you?" Liam, ever humble, scratched his head. "Not sure. Still feels like I have a long way to go." That was normal. No one adjusted to bloodshed overnight. Zeke, however, had bigger concerns. The timer was running out. He had subjugated 99 monsters from 9 different species. But that last species was nowhere to be found. He had searched everywhere, even going after leeches and bugs the size of his finger, but they didn't count. His frustration boiled over. Those damn Zimmons. They went out of their way to rig this dungeon with powerful monsters to kill him. Yet they couldn't even do it properly. Then, suddenly, a chill ran down Zeke's spine. Danger. A deep primal instinct screamed at him. The ground beneath them trembled, sending small rocks skittering across the floor. Liam, seated near the fire, glanced around in confusion. Then, the tremors worsened. Cracks splintered across the rocky floor. The entire cavern began to shake. Zeke's eyes sharpened. He knew this feeling. He bolted toward Liam, drawing his sword in one swift motion. "Drop the bag and move now," he shouted. Liam was a second too slow. Before he could react, Zeke shoved him out of the way, just as something massive tore through the ground. Blood splattered everywhere. The cavern floor was suddenly painted crimson. Liam's mind went blank, a jolt of panic running through him. Then, his eyes locked on Zeke's arm. The young lord's uniform sleeve had been shredded, and his left arm looked mangled, drenched in blood. Heart pounding, Liam rushed to his side. "My lord!" But Zeke calmly waved him off. "Relax. It's not my blood." As sudden as the attack had been, he had the presence of mind to push Liam clear while counterattacking at the same time. Now, however, he had bigger problems. From the gaping hole in the cavern floor, a gargantuan, nightmarish creature emerged, its grotesque form writhing as it searched for fresh prey. Liam's throat went dry. A dungeon worm, an incredibly dangerous monster, one that typically required 8 well-trained purple knights to subjugate. So, this was the Zimon's final trap, a battle of survival. Liam stood frozen, watching as the burrowing behemoth tore through the cavern like a living freight train. His hands clenched into fists. He wanted to help, but he knew the truth. He would only be a liability in a fight like this. That didn't stop him from rummaging through their supplies, desperately searching for anything that could assist Zeke. Meanwhile, Zeke was fully locked in, his blade flashing as he deflected the hundreds of razor-sharp fangs lunging for his flesh. This time, his true battle instinct shone through. Even a Blue Knight would hesitate to face a dungeon worm in such a cramped environment. The creature devoured the earth as it moved, meaning time was against them. If Zeke didn't finish this quickly, he and Liam would either be buried alive or shredded to pieces. The monster lunged again, its colossal body tunneling through the rock. Zeke sidestepped at the last second, ducking just inches away from its crushing mass. He needed space, and now he had it. As the dungeon worm surfaced once more, he lunged. His blade plunged deep into the beast's grotesque, pulsating abdomen. The strike landed, but it wasn't enough. Gritting his teeth, Zeke ripped the sword through its flesh, carving it open. A fountain of purple bile and blood erupted from the monster's mouth, splattering across the cavern walls. The creature convulsed violently, its massive form thrashing in agony. But Zeke wasn't done. His killing intent reached its peak. If cutting this thing in half was what it took, so be it. Just as Zeke was about to land the finishing blow, the ground beneath his feet collapsed. He had stepped into a hollowed-out section, throwing off his stance. The sudden drop gave the dungeon worm a chance to turn the tables. Dangling by his sword, Zeke barely managed to keep himself from falling. But the monster wasted no time. It lunged, its sinuous body coiling tightly around him like a massive constrictor. The pressure was unbearable. Zeke felt his bones creak, his organs being smashed together. A sickening pain shot through his body, forcing a mouthful of blood up his throat. The worm kept tightening, its crushing force threatening to snap him in two. Then, out of nowhere, a sword pierced the monster's hide. Liam, ignoring Zeke's order to stand by, his desperate subordinate had charged in, stabbing the worm to divert its attention. The attack, though not fatal, made the beast's grip slacken just enough. Zeke's automatic healing kicked in, repairing his internal injuries at a rapid pace. That was all he needed. In a flash, he twisted free from the worm's deadly embrace, flipping through the air and landing a safe distance away. A strategy is born. "Liam, what the hell did you just do?" Zeke asked, still catching his breath. Liam held up his sword, explaining quickly. "I coated my blade with anesthetic before striking." Zeke's eyes widened in realization. The main ingredient in that anesthetic? Belladonna. For humans, it simply dulls the senses. But for worms, even ones this massive, it's a lethal poison. Despite being under extreme pressure, Liam had remembered the worm's weakness and adapted in the heat of battle. His sharp thinking and quick action were proof of his natural talent. A glimpse of the mercenary king he would one day become. Acknowledging Liam's huge contribution, Zeke decided to include him in the final attack. Now fully recovered, he exploded forward, pushing his speed to the absolute limit. Running up the worm's massive body, he reached the embedded sword from earlier and ripped it out. Blade in hand, he locked eyes with Liam and gave the signal. Liam gritted his teeth, pouring everything into one last, desperate stab. Another dose of belladonna surged through the monster's system, making its entire body spasm violently. The worm crashed to the ground, sluggish and struggling. That was Zeke's cue, activating soul manifestation. his blade ignited with a hazy, purple aura. Just as promised, Zeke delivered one smooth, clean, and effortless slash, slicing the dungeon worm in half. The monstrous corpse collapsed, its severed halves twitching before finally going still. Zeke landed back on solid ground, looking effortlessly cool as system notifications flooded his vision. Quest complete. The sudden quest had been successfully completed. As promised, all the karma points he had earned were doubled. On top of that, he received 2 random boxes to open at his convenience. His current balance? 780 karma points, and a whole lot of options.